So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where civilization starts over. We're now on episode 47 of the series, and in the last episode we saw the beginning of the War of the Greats, aka World War III. If you didn't see the last episode, probably should maybe go watch it, because you just got spoiled, but ignore the green dots, that means nothing, right? Oh yeah, World War III started between Russia, the Old Empire, and China. All three of these nations are at war with each other. Well, not officially. The Old Empire and China aren't at war just yet, but we'll cover that here in a second. We saw a series of nuclear strikes throughout all of these countries, which is going to certainly cripple them and change the war effort overall. But today we're getting to the actual conventional fighting between the three powers. So if you guys do enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We're trying to get to 200,000 subscribers. As stated in a community post on Monday, this is going to be our longest and most advanced war in channel history. But we're also adding in a new layer that's going to be used. So I hope you guys are excited for that. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into our quick recap. So the Old Empire and Russia both had their leaders assassinated, which prompted a tense face-off between the two on the border of Ukraine and Russia. One thing led to another, and an air skirmish between Russia and the Old Empire took place in Chinese territory, which also brought China into that standoff. We then saw a mistake start this war as Russian radar detected multiple old Iberian nukes heading towards their territory, but alas, it actually wasn't nuclear bombs, and their radar system got it wrong, which caused Russia to actually launch nukes in the Old Empire territory, this time for real. So essentially, Russia nuked the Old Empire, and the Old Empire, of course, nuked them back, and that is how our nuclear war started. But at the very end of the episode, we also saw the Old Empire preemptively nuke multiple sites in China, which will officially bring them into the war, and that's where we begin. So the Old Empire nukes multiple military bases across China, also targeting some major cities, but mostly going after major military bases that house Chinese nukes. In the Orange Country, their entire nuclear arsenal is destroyed as they only had one site with nuclear bombs within. The Red Team had all of their nuclear sites hit as well, leaving them with, of course, 0. In the Gold Team, 4 sites were struck, but they do still have 2 nukes at their disposal. And now for China itself, 8 nuclear bombs hit on Chinese soil and took out roughly 30 bombs. So this will leave China's arsenal looking something like this, with most of their nukes in foreign territory wiped out completely and over half of their arsenal gone. They now remain with 58 total bombs, which is still a lot more than the Old Empire and Russia. Actually, it's tied with Russia, but way more than the Old Empire. Now, at the end of the last episode, I also wanted you guys to draw attention to this number. As you can see, the Old Empire has 47 total nukes, but 40 of them are in their allied territory, which means the Old Empire only has 7 nukes left on their own soil, 7 nukes to defend themselves with. The preemptive strike on China did do a lot of damage, leaving them with 46 nukes, but 46 is still a lot more than 7, meaning a possible response from China would be deadly for the Old Empire. Now, there are 2 points that I want to make before we get to the conventional fighting. The technology level of the world right now, it is currently 1990 compared to our current timeline. However, the technology of this world is around the 1950s-ish. These are essentially just tactical nukes. They're nowhere as strong as the 1950s nukes we saw in real life. Like I said, they're comparable to the little boy bomb dropped in Japan, maybe a little bit weaker than that, but these things are pure tactical, which means it's not as devastating as the real world nukes are. Now, point number 2. Why did the Old Empire nuke China? Well, similar to how Russia thought the Old Empire would strike them at any point, the Old Empire thought that China would strike them at any point after starting the war with Russia. With both of these countries being nuked and weakened, the Old Empire thought that China would just come in and clean them up, which is why they took the preemptive strikes on all of China's nuclear supplies in hopes of leveling any chance that we would see a big response from China. That is the leader of the Old Empire's justification for his action, and Russia's leader will actually take some inspiration from this, as well as China's leader. You see, the Old Empire their nuclear supply is basically gone. They're not going to do too much damage. However, Russia still has over 20 bombs in their arsenal, and China, of course, has around 46. So, let's even it out a little bit, right? China and its ally will launch first, as these guys launch 2 nuclear bombs into the Brown Team's territory, taking out 2 nuclear sites. We then see China and Russia launch their supplies at around the same time. Multiple big explosions are seen throughout Russia and China at the same time, relatively close to each other's borders. At the end of things, both of these countries launch 8 nukes at each other, with the Gold Team launching 2 nukes at the Brown Team. And now for our very quick updated nuclear weapon numbers. So starting with China, of course, their ally launched all of their 2 nukes that remain, so they now have 0, and China launched 8 nukes, leaving them with around 50 and 10. Now, of course, Russia's strikes in the Northern Territory destroyed a large supply of their nukes, and that now leaves China at 33 and 10, meaning they only have 23 nukes on their own territory. Now for Russia and their ally, of course, their nuclear supply was destroyed, they now have 0, and Russia launched 8 bombs into China, leaving them with 50. However, once again, their nuclear supplies were destroyed by China, which leaves them with a staggering 27 and 24, even less than the old empire who has 7, Russia now has 3, and China has 23, a big difference. Now, there is going to be a slightly different approach for the rest of the war. Countries are going to be fairly reluctant to launch their nuclear bombs. Now, why is that? Well, quite simply, they don't have enough left to really ration. You don't want to use all of your nuclear bombs because then you have 0 and you're very vulnerable. So this is kind of like deterrence in a way, where like we're saving these for like a last ditch effort. Like if we get folded in this war, we're launching them all at you. That's kind of like the thinking here. So all 3 of these countries are actually going to stop the nuclear war and start the conventional war. And welcome to the video. Our fighting begins where it all started, on the border between the old empire and Russia. Now Russia does have the advantage here. This is because when they saw that the radar detected nukes coming their way, they also mobilized their military for conventional warfare, which was of course ahead of the old empire, who didn't respond until they had already been nuked. So Russia's ground troops will quickly move into old Iberian territory, targeting major cities in the Ukrainian region and taking to pretty much right away. The old empire's defenses are, of course, destroyed. There are a lot of nuclear green dots everywhere. So Russia has the advantage right away, even going into some nuclear territory to take over what may be left, even though there definitely isn't anything left. But of course, fighting a conventional war while also getting out of a nuclear war, it's going to be kind of difficult to invade because of all the radiation. So Russia is using special suits that block a majority of the radiation. Not all of it though. So this is dangerous. Of course, after the nuclear war started, they didn't start their conventional warfare right away. Of course, they waited for the blast to settle down. It might have been a few weeks after the nukes settled, but nonetheless, the radiation is still going to be there. So it's very difficult for this conventional warfare, but it does still happen, and Russia's advances into the old empire continue. They invade towards the pivotal corridor here, which allows the old empire to connect up with the rest of its territory in Ukraine, and they managed to cut that off, severing any supply lines that the old empire might have been running, and leading to a large offensive into the Ukrainian territory. Elsewhere, Russia starts an offensive into the white team country. Now, these guys were very crippled by the nukes. They couldn't really withstand it, but they do still have 7 nukes that they can fire at any point. Once again, though, that's like last minute, like, oh god, they're coming, we're gonna die, so let's just blow them up kind of situation. So they don't have to worry about using them just yet, although the Russians are moving through their territory very efficiently. Up in Norway, we see the Norwegian military finally ready for their advances, as they very quickly move into Russian territory and kick them all the way out of Sweden. And now comes in a new aspect to the war, the navies fight. Now, it is without a doubt that the navies of both Norway and Russia are extremely strong. Norway is kind of like your Scandinavian empire over here. They have control over the entrance to the Baltic Sea, and of course a lot of coastal areas in the Baltic Sea going all the way up into the North Sea, so a very strong navy is pivotal for Norway's existence. As for Russia though, they don't really have too much of an ocean line anywhere other than in the Black Sea, which they just kind of expanded on, and over here in the Baltic Sea, so most of Russia's navy, if not all of it, is of course in the Baltic Sea, which will lead to a lot of naval fighting between these two in this small body of water. Although immediately though, Norway does gain the advantage, taking these islands from Russia and pushing them back in naval territory. Now, there is something to notice here, is that Norway has complete control over this entire Gulf up here, and that is because Finland is allowing Norway to use their ports for naval access. Now, Finland, of course, is a neutral country. They are not involved in this war, but they are kind of working with Norway here, so that's something to watch in the future if Russia ever decides that that is too far. Although now, though, we do stay in this region as Norway starts an invasion into the Russian puppet states. Now, these are spoils from World War II from the Brown team. I don't know how they would feel about this, probably not too well, but the Norwegians see a lot of success in mostly undefended territory in the North German state. They end up taking all of its northern coast and start pushing towards its capital. Okay, so the war has started. It's been ongoing for a little bit now, and it looks like Russia has the advantage. Now, there is still no fighting between China and anyone else, but they are getting very ready and very close to doing so. The main front line, of course, is between the old empire and Russia, but there's also been a lot of fighting in the Baltic Sea. But what about the war over in the Americas? These 3 countries are, of course, all at war with each other. Well, this war is going to be a little bit different than in any war that's been fought over here before, and there's been multiple. Mexico and America, of course, are at war with each other. However, they do realize that there is a strategic point of interest in the middle. Texas. So like, if we just invaded Texas and got them out of the way and then fought each other, that would be a lot easier for both of us, right? Yeah, sure. So Americans start invading into Texas and see a lot of success at first, as Texas is fairly unprepared for this war, mostly because they might have been preparing for an operation into the terrorist territory over here. That of course didn't come to fruition because they're being invaded now. Both America and Mexico see a lot of success in their early endeavors in Texas, as both countries are able to invade and capture major cities. Now, as for the naval battles between these three, it's really not looking too good in Texas's favor. Now, their navy has been pretty crushed up already by America and Mexico in the Gulf of Mexico, and Texas just looked entirely unprepared for this war. Now we jump ships over to Iberia. Here we see a similar struggle take place as the navy of the West African country and the navy of the Iberian country fight up against each other. Now both of these countries, behind closed doors, went into a secret agreement not to fire nukes at each other. This is voiding both of their alliances in some way, but both of these countries in some way also kind of are the lone kind of guy in their alliance. Like the West African country is in the Cross Alliance and the Iberian country is of course in the Square Alliance, but they're kind of distant in a way. Now they're going to uphold all their privileges and uphold all the requirements of the alliance, but they don't really seem as close with their host countries as they probably should be. So this is why this behind the door thing happens. Now, they're not friendly with each other, they're hostile with each other, but they do acknowledge that nuclear bombs are probably not the best course of action, and they're only hosting nuclear bombs because their host country require them to do so. Also, kind of like a scare tactic between the two of them. That's how nukes really work, realistically. Well, the Iberian country does get the upper hand at first, pushing the West African country completely out of Europe, and then they await a response because they have little to no interest going into Africa and fighting that front just yet, not without the help of some other allies first. Now let's talk about the navies of both Russia and the Old Empire in this theater. Good God. The Old Empire has complete naval domination over all of the waters around their territory, obviously. They have the strongest navy in the world, strongest air force in the world, and strongest army in the world. But this is kind of ridiculous. This is a lot of navy and a lot of control. However, their navy is large, but it's also very spread out between all of the different fronts, which means that they might end up sacrificing some naval supremacy over these regions in order to fight in areas like the Black Sea, or eventually maybe over here in the waters of China. But Russia's naval dominance in the Black Sea is limited at that. They just have this own little pocket right here. And to be honest with you, the Old Empire is going to completely run that pocket over very soon. So yeah, don't even worry about that, Russia. We got that covered. But back to fighting, we see the Russians completely sweep the Old Empire out of Ukraine, invading into the Crimean Peninsula, where a last stand battle is held in this major city. But unfortunately, it doesn't last very long, and the Old Empire is forced to retreat its forces back down to the continent. Now, despite this major victory for Russia, they do not hold any naval supremacy over the Black Sea, and that's for a very simple reason. They cannot get any ships down here. If you try to drop any in the sea, they're going to get blown up, and if you try to bring any over, which you can't right now, but if you try to bring any over, you're not going to get past this. So yeah, it's utter complete domination and control by the Old Empire in the naval front, and the Square team has that large advantage. But now for the fighting between Russia and China. China will act first, sending their forces quickly into Russia and taking over this territory, which not too long ago was subject of war. They actually kind of met with open arms here. The people that invaded these areas, like, you know, Russia, they did so very cruelly, and it ended up not really leading to a lot of assimilation, which very simply just means that Russia didn't control these areas very well, and now they are welcoming China with open arms, with little to no resistance by the local population. We now see China's ally make a move as they also start to invade into Russian territory, but the response that they meet is a little bit more harsh, and they're unable to push past this front line. Now here comes a bunch of fun stuff. If you know your history, you know that these two are about to absolutely obliterate each other. Except they're really not, because it's impossible to really invade anywhere over here. A lot of mountains going on. So any invasion that does happen is very small, and there isn't too much going on between these two on this front line. However, where we do see a lot of movement is on the border between the Green Team and the Old Empire. There is old hatred here. The Green Team despises the Old Empire and everything it stands for, and they will very happily send their very nationalistic military, which consists of a very large percent of their total population. Yeah, you heard that right. Their whole population is involved in this war. This is a total war for the Green Team. They will quickly move into Old Empyrean territory and do some absolutely atrocious stuff. But it does prove to be fairly efficient as they capture multiple major cities on this front line, and it kind of looks like the old empire is a little bit of a fraud at this point because they're losing pretty big. You thought the old empire finally sends its counteroffensive forces, and they absolutely decimate the Russians in the Caucasian front. However, advances into the Crimean and Ukrainian areas are proven to be very difficult. So why do that when you can just focus over here? The old empire will start to make advances into Russian territory, taking any military bases that remain and also heading straight towards any major cities, which they quickly capture. We then see a disagreement among the leaders of the old empire. One military leader wants to continue up north into Russia and go straight for their capital, while the other sees an effective move going for Central Asia and taking them out of the war and knocking out a large part of Russia's oil reserves. Both are pretty good ideas, so let's do them both at the same time. So the old empire will painstakingly push north, capturing very slowly many Russian major cities. And the ultimate goal here is, of course, to reach the capital of Russia in hopes of ending the war, but the Russian military proves to be very hard to fight against. We are in like the dead of summer at this point now though, so there's no winter to worry about just yet, but it's coming. Now, as for the old empire's other plans, they will move into Russia's allies and start taking territory. And this goes extremely well as they're able to take the capital city of the lime green team. Now, this country is extremely weak. I'm not going to lie to you, one of the weakest in the world, so that's why they lost pretty quickly. But you'll also notice that the capital of the pink team is right there, and the invasion here goes much the same as they're able to take that capital city. Now, you'll notice that the colors are a little bit different here. I figured that it was about time to probably differentiate a little. What did I just say? To try to differentiate a little bit differently the colors so you understand where the borders of the countries are, because that was a little bit confusing, but this is a lot better. So this right here, this is Russia's color, and this is all the old empire, of course, but you can just kind of see where the front line is a little bit better in perspective of the border. Anyway, with the old empire's massive counteroffensive over here in the Caucasian region, Russia will kind of re-strategize a little bit better. Now, they, of course, before they were sending all of their military straight down here to fight the old empire, well, also over here as well, but mostly focusing on the old empire, not worrying too much about Norway and the white team. However, after a series of disagreements amongst Russian generals, it is then determined that instead of holding an offensive over here, we should hold a counteroffensive and instead attack the weaker part of the Square Alliance, which just so happens to be the white team. That mission is a go, and it's not pretty. Also, I'm going to disable the nukes just so we can kind of see a little bit better. Sorry about that. Russian troops will storm through the white team, and this really exposes how weak they were. I mean, not like weak like this, but if you were to split the countries of the world in half in terms of like strong and weak, they would definitely be on the weaker side. And Russia, of course, is the third strongest country in the world. China's number 2, old empire number 1. And yeah, goodbye to your capital. With Russia's staggering moves over here in the white team, we see the old empire kind of reorganize their military a little bit for more emphasis on offensive and counteroffensive capabilities in the Balkan region. Russia continues to move their way until they eventually meet the border of the old empire, and this splits the old white country into two. And after capturing the major city over here near the border of the purple team, we see the complete capitulation of the white team. With the white team completely out of the war, it is now time for Russia's second offensive to begin, this time focusing in on the Balkan areas of the old empire, and right away, the old empire is in serious danger as they threaten to cut Greece off from land connection. Now, of course, naval connection still exists and is probably even prioritized over land connection, but due to the fact that this would still kind of hurt, the old empire wants to stop it. Even more so, if Russia were to strategize correctly, and this is now their new plan, they could effectively take over all of Greece, cut the old empire off from Italy, and start launching their naval boats into the Mediterranean Sea, offering a rival to the old empire's navy. This is the plan. Up north, Russia's navy is actually doing quite well compared to the Norwegians. The Russian navy is more advanced, but the Norwegian navy is a lot more numerous, and then the Russians are able to push back the Norwegians basically to their own territorial waters. A very pivotal battle is then fought on this island right here, a very strong Norwegian military base. This island is basically a fortress, and it ends in a Russian victory, which is a huge blow to the Norwegians. However, for the Norwegians' offensive into the northern Russian state, it's going a lot better as they're able to capture the capital of this area. And soon we see the Norwegians basically going over to the brown team and be like, hey, if you want to join this war, you could like totally get your old land back. And the brown team is going to take this and they're going to consider it. However, they will come out and declare neutrality in the end, stating that they are not interested in a world war one that could even turn their territory nuclear. Okay, so far, this has been as bloody as predicted. Russia does seem to be winning so far, but if we know anything from my videos, if you're winning at first, that doesn't mean anything. In fact, if you're winning at first, you probably end up losing the war, but this war is completely different from any war that I've ever covered before, because there are 3 main contributors, which means that there could be 1 loser, there could be 2 losers, they could all lose, there could be only 1 winner. I mean, like, the possibilities between these 3 are endless. They're not endless, never mind, but they're a lot more numerous compared to a one-on-one, which is like there's 2 possible, maybe 4 possible scenarios in total. With this, there are, of course, a lot more. I think like 27 possibilities, maybe. Not good at math, but 3 to the power of 3. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue on with this war. Back over to the Americas. We see the Texas Navy get completely folded by both Mexico and America, and fighting between these 2 navies ensue in the Gulf of Mexico. America does appear to have the upper hand at first, but like I said, the war is just starting, so that doesn't mean really anything. But the Americans will continue their offensive in the Texan territory, mostly focusing in on this southeastern area, as this is where most of Texas's population lies, as well as, of course, their capital city, which is, of course, of utmost importance when you're fighting a war. The same is said for Mexico. They are heavily targeting the capital city, and after taking another major city, it's not looking too good for Texas, even at this early stage in the war. Also, I do want to say real quick, I don't have a definitive end to, well, I know how the war ends. I know who loses the war, if anyone loses the war. Does someone lose the war? Maybe not, maybe so. But I don't have like a timeline for the end of the war, which means that, like I said, this is going to be like one of my longest wars ever covered across multiple episodes. So if you have any suggestions for the second part of this war, if you want to see any events happen, maybe any countries get involved, as long as it doesn't change my outcome too much, I will look at those suggestions. So leave any suggestions that you have for the next part of this video in the comments below for episode 48. Also, I was advised to announce that there is a mapping competition occurring in the Discord server. I think there's actual like prizes that are going to be given out. So if you're good at mapping and you're interested in competing, make sure to join the Discord server in the link in the description. Anyway, back to the fighting. Now back over to the Chinese front line, we see Russia finally pull off a counteroffensive against the Chinese. Specifically against the Chinese though, they're a little bit more worried about the strategical position of this land compared to this land, even though this land does threaten more cities. They're holding up the gold team pretty well though, so they don't have to worry about an advance just yet. They do have to worry about the Chinese though, and their counteroffensive goes well and then it stops because all of China's forces are focused right here. It's a long shot to the old empire, and while they are still at war with each other, they likely won't see any fighting until this area gets cleaned up a little bit better. Now back to this front line where it's really important. The old empire will continue to push back into their own territory, just very slowly. It's very difficult to do this. It's also very costly as the Russians have set up applicable fortifications. However, though, they do manage to maneuver into this major city, which is seen as an astounding victory for the old empire in the early stages of the war, and their hopes of a counteroffensive are pretty high. Over here, however, it's still not looking too pretty for them, as the Russians are continuing to sweep into their territory, now focusing in on the Balkan area. Likewise, over here in this area, we see them continue to not be able to stop the green team's advances because, first of all, that's a lot of troops. Second of all, the old empire has their military very spread out right now. However, you will notice something, and I won't say anything about it, but you will notice something that happens right here pretty quickly. The brown team, despite being invaded from the east, they will also start to send troops into this territory, and I know that there are mountains here. I know that it would be very hard to invade. I know. I know. It's just that without like kind of slightly ignoring geography, this war would be very stalemated. First of all, the Caucasus Mountains, they would serve as a border between Russia and the old empire, preventing any real kind of offensive into the old empire or Russia. Over here, once you get all of Greece, which good luck, where are you gonna go from there? Because like the corridor right here, and then you'd have to island hop into Italy. The only kind of real front line that is sort of invadable is like this territory right here, but there's nothing really worth anything over here. So like I said, we do have to kind of very slightly ignore geography in that sense. But now back over to the front line between Russia and Norway, it's starting to shift against Norway a lot. Russia is sending a big military group to retake all of their German state, and that is exactly what they do, minus a little bit of land over here, which Norway is holding down. Navy-wise though, the Norwegians are getting some reinforcements from their allies, which is allowing them to push back the Russians in the Baltic Sea. That advance looks something like this, heavy in the north, and there is little movement in the south. But the main goal of the Norwegians at this point is to retake their big fortress, which the Russians have now converted to themselves. And it's really hurting the Norwegian Navy a lot. Now I do want to say I was originally going to do air superiority, but I really can't. I mean, I can, but it looks really bad. I was going to do colors for each alliance, so the square alliance would be purple because of the purple team. But when you do another layer over all of this already, you can kind of see how it's really hard to see exactly what you're looking at. The front lines are confusing. Even over Norway, if I were to do that, yeah, it just doesn't look very good. So for normal videos, we can start to incorporate things like air superiority, but as for this series, that's not very possible at this very point. What is possible, though, is continued land invasion. The Russians will continue their advances into Greece and are now threatening to cut off the Greek peninsula from the old empire, and enough is enough, said the old empire. Counteroffensive in your face, and the Russians are pushed back pretty greatly. Not too much though, they still are hanging around. Likewise, screw you, said Russia, as they also pull off a counteroffensive, retaking a major city over here, kind of close to where Stalingrad was, sort of. Oh, okay. The old empire, having complete control over the Caspian Sea, was very easily able to make an amphibious landing in the green team and attack their forces from behind. Maybe that's why we didn't see too much resistance from the old empire. But yeah, there is some really ugly stuff that takes place after this invasion, and a large portion of the green team's armies are cut off, and they are all slaughtered. Goodbye. Okay, there's the counteroffensive. Yep, all right. So the green team had a very strong start, but the old empire finally locked in, and with their cheeky little maneuver around the green team's forces, it's not looking good for them all of a sudden. Ooh, yeah, ooh, that's tough. We see a complete amphibious invasion of the coastal areas of this lighter green country, and that's going to hurt them a lot. Not to the point of capitulation, though, because they will be occupied by their allies instead. So I'm going to retain their color, even though they are no longer really a country and are instead just being occupied by their allies. So the old empire is having a lot of success in the Caspian front, the Caspian theater, as I would like to call it now. This includes the Caspian Sea, obviously, probably into Central Asia, but I'm thinking this is a different theater. And then we have the Ukrainian theater / the Balkan theater. I would call that theater something like this. Then you have the Mediterranean theater. I'm not gonna go through it all. The Norwegian theater, the German theater, blah blah blah. You get it. What's this theater called then? It's called the Bye Bye Brown Team theater, as the red team is able to push through all of their fortifications and mountains, because screw mountains, and take the capital city of the brown team. Ouchie, said the brown team. They're then going to pull their forces out of the old empire for self-defense. The green team will get mad at them for that, but oh well. In fact, we're going to take over the territory that you just ditched before the old empire can get here. All right, cool. So the green team now has even more advances into the old empire, and the Russians are now pushing back against the gold team. Goodbye, get out of our territory, said the Russians. Hello, said the Russians, and they take a little bit of territory from the gold team before just straight up taking their capital city, and that's going to hurt them a lot, as per usual. China's a little bit mad about this, so they will continue their offensive again after being pushed back a little bit. They'll take another Russian major city, and now they have to make a decision. Do we go up north and capture these major cities? Probably not. That's not too smart. Do we head to the center area and take these major cities? Maybe. That could prove to be strategically important because it would cut off these cities as well. Or do we just say screw it and go after all these southern major cities, damaging Russia's population numbers and economy? Where are their nukes at? Oh, I did it on the wrong layer. Okay, sorry. So there are a few more nuclear sites that are not being shown because I simply forgot to show them on the right layer, but here you go. Actually, I should be able to fix that real quick. That's not right. All right, never mind. I can't fix it. Doesn't matter though. The sites of the nuclear bombs aren't important until after the war. But China's strategy is to go after these southern cities because they are a little bit more important than anything else. Even though taking these cities could prove to be better in the long run, China will send all of its forces now heading west. And with this, they enter into their allies' territory and start helping them fight back against the Russians, recapturing their capital city and doing damage to any Russian defenders in the area. Over here in the Caucasian region, the Russians will continue their counteroffensive, take back another major city, picking back actually all of their major cities. Now the old empire has 0, but kind of predictably they are going to lose a little bit more of their land over here on this front line. In fact, the old empire takes back all of their own territory and starts an invasion into their former ally, which at this point has been converted into a Russian puppet government, kind of similar to what Germany did to all of the invaded territories during World War II. So this is no longer like a liberation camp. Well, I mean, it is, but it's not going to like recolor the color of the white team because that country is gone. The government is dead. It doesn't exist anymore. Oh hell. The West Africans are coming. They are entering into Iberia. Okay, this isn't good. Oh god. The Dark Scion team they want some revenge, it appears. They join the Cross Alliance, declare war on the Square Alliance, and that's not really the best thing that you want to happen. It completely catches the Iberian country by surprise, which leads to them losing 2 major cities in the early weeks of the war. This also allows time for the West African country to have a little bit of time to prepare, as their forces now move into full force Iberian territory. Their navy gets pushed back, and the Old Empire is a little bit worried that they might be losing an ally. Back over in Central Asia, the Red Team does a spearhead, captures the last major city of the Brown Team, which effectively leads to their capitulation. Just it's going to look a little bit weird because they're not going to fully capitulate. Their allies will once again occupy their territory in their place, but it looks something like this now, and this is Green Team and Russian forces holding out. But with them out of the way, the Red Team can start an advance into Russia, capturing a major city on the southern border, and allowing for China and the Gold Team to almost completely push the Russians out of the country over here in the west. Okay, so now looking at a little quick analysis of the war, at least conventionally, we can see that the Cross Team is very clearly losing. We can see that the Cross Team is at probably the biggest disadvantage, as they have lost only 1 ally so far, but I mean technically 2 with these guys gone. And then the Brown Team as well. The Square Team has lost 1 ally, the White Team, or the Farmers Union, if we want to call it that. And the Iberian Team seems to be in a little bit of trouble over here as well, something to monitor. Also over here, we see the Cross Team losing, as Texas is not in the greatest of spots. If I had to choose a winning team so far, I'd definitely give it over to the Chinese team. They have lost only a small amount of land, even then though you can replace that land with the gains that they have gotten in the Brown Team, and it's very clear that the Circle Team is on the offensive in this war. As for the rest of the world, most of them are just watching, but there are a few watchers in silence that are waiting for maybe a good opportunity to jump in at any moment. And I do want to just take a moment real quick. This series has come a very long way. We started in Oman. This was a comment in one of the videos, but I'm going to reiterate it. Shout out to whoever wrote that comment. I'm sorry that I didn't look up your name, but this all started with a bunch of red dudes in Oman and has turned into 3-time World War, 1-time nuclear war, multiple instances of smaller conflict and regional wars, some genocides, and just a whole lot of bad stuff. So shout out to the series, 47 episodes old, over a year old, still going strong. I do want to reiterate while I'm saying this right now, there has been talks of me ending the series in like comment sections. There's been some misinformation going around. I don't plan on ending the series anytime soon. Now, I do have the ending of this series worked out. I can implement that whenever I want. So if I feel like the series is A, dying, or B, it's just time to end it, I can end it whenever I want. I know how I want to end it. There's a scenario that I have in my head, and it doesn't require too many countries to do. Also, I do have season 2 of this series. If we ever want to do a season 2, I have that also ready to go. Now, I don't have it recorded or anything like that, but I'm saying like I have what I want to happen like in my head, in the back of my head, in a file drawer. So if we ever decide that we want a season 2 of WICSO after it ends, whenever it ends, then we can maybe do that. I do want to put a crazy idea out there though. Is it possible for us to reach 100 episodes? Do we end it on episode 100? That would be insane, but I'm totally down for that. It just kind of relies on you guys, because I can draw this out. Well, I don't want to say draw it out, but I can prolong this series for as long as I want, because there's no realistic boundaries that are set in place. This is a completely fictional world, so you can do kind of whatever you want to do. But it could get old, which means that I would probably end the series once it starts losing too much support. No plans of that, by the way. I have no plans of doing that. But, you know, episode 100 is theoretical, but definitely possible. We're already on 47, going to 48 now. And there's only been 3 world wars. We need to have a World War 7, guys. Like, seriously? Anyway, let's do a little bit more fighting before I decide to end this video. In Europe, the old empire's advances into their old ally are stalled. In fact, Russia is now once again pushing back in this region. However, due to the heavy amount of naval dominance that the old empire has, their advances are pretty much cut short as they are bombarded by a ton of cruisers and battleships off the coast. And to keep the back and forth nature going forward, we also see the old empire start to lose claims again to Russia in this area as they take back this major city and start to push into old Iberian territory, all the while once again losing territory to the old empire over here as they take 2 major cities. Very back and forth, I'm sorry. Over in Central Asia, the Green Team does do a slight counteroffensive, and this counteroffensive goes well enough to where they can get re-access to the sea, but the old empire decides to ruin their day just a little bit by taking another major city in the south of this light green country, which also allows them to advance their front line over here in the west. Elsewhere though, the Green Team is fully pushing through this kind of Central Asian slash No, this is like Turkmenistan, maybe Uzbekistan. But they're pushing right towards this major city and they're able to capture it. And this is a huge blow to the old empire because this is a very strategically important city. It had already been nuked, which destroys its strategic purposes, but military-wise, they had come into the city after it was destroyed and set up a very big outpost there. That outpost is now gone, and with the slight collapse of old Iberian strategical and logistical optics over here, the Orange team decides to make its move, invading into old Iberian territory, as well as their puppet state. We even see the Red team make slight advances into the old empire, not before taking some more brown territory though, and it doesn't look too good for the old empire on this front. In the Americas, Mexico's front line is expanded upon, as they are pretty much just doing like one big sweeping front line, kind of similar to the Eastern Front in World War II. They get a little bit more strategical when it comes to the coastal areas of Texas, as they start to push up in a likely spearhead towards their capital city. Likewise, America will do the same thing, kind of sweeping down the coastal areas before kind of formulating what is probable to be a spearhead towards their Texan capital city. Back over in Europe, we see Russia's puppet state completely kick the Norwegians out with the help of Russia, of course. And from here, Russia enters into Norwegian territory from their puppet territory. Now, these guys aren't going to do any invading on their own because they don't have their own military. It's simply just a Russian military here. But Russia will push up the Danish peninsula, and it's not too good for Norway because they are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to conventional warfare with Russia. Now, of course, they were able to take this area in the beginning stages of the war. That's because Russia kind of abandoned it in a way, but that foothold is there should Russia ever choose to invade Norway. And we saw that Norway's conventional warfare was at a loss when Russia took their military fortress here, and now they're at a complete loss. But they are able to hold on to the coastal areas and this major city for now. But Russia is slowly making its way up the peninsula. And with the Russian conventional victories in this region, we also see Russian naval victories along the coastal areas of its puppet state going all the way up to the Danish islands, where huge naval battles are occurring near Copenhagen. If Russia can get out of the Baltic Sea and probably even kick the Norwegian Navy out of this area, they can finally start to import food, because at this point, Russia hasn't been able to do that. Now, Russia can make its own food, right? But a lot of countries, even realistically, import food from other countries. They need to also import supplies, probably from the West African country, because as of now, these two countries are fighting on isolation. They aren't really in contact with each other in terms of supplies and resources. There's no sharing happening, but if they were able to connect with each other, it would be a huge part in the war. Now, the old empire does have access to their ally in Iberia, although they need to probably send some ships over because this is becoming an issue. But they are kind of blocked from getting any resources up to Norway because of the West African Navy. Okay, so as of now, the navies show us a very telling story. Russia cannot get access to the ocean and thus their allies in the West Africa and Texas because Norway controls the strait of which exit the Baltic Sea, and they don't have naval access anywhere else. The old empire cannot get out into the Atlantic Ocean because the West African country's navy is currently blocking the only exit route to the Atlantic Ocean. Now, of course, they have the right to just go around Africa, but that takes a really long time, and they of course have been doing that, but going through the Mediterranean would be so much more simpler because it would let them reach Norway a lot quicker. Now, Norway's #1 oil supplier, of course, is the old empire. And with the old empire having to go all the way around Africa, it allows time for the West African country to intercept any oil tankers and simply just blow them up, which environmental disaster, but we don't care about the environment in this series. I mean, look at all the green dots, really. So what my point is that Norway is without oil reserves. Of course, they have their own Norwegian oil, but they need more. So what Norway will do about this is that they are going to cross the North Sea over towards Greenland. Norwegian troops will make a landing in southern Greenland and work to take their capital almost immediately. Greenland is an extremely weak country in this series, but the Norwegian military's goal here is to go ahead and secure all of the Greenland oil reserve and fields, and that is exactly what they do as they take the entire island. I don't actually know where the oil reserves are in Greenland, but we're just trying to cover the whole thing just in case. This will also cause Norway to kind of make an agreement with the remaining government, which has probably fled to the southern bit of this island. Basically, what they say is that we're going to pillage your island, but we'll give you some reparations in the end, and they're forced to agree to that because they have no other option. So Norway will seize all of Greenland in hopes of getting some oil. Now, Russia sees this, and Russia is understandably a little bit mad about that. So Russia will respond to Norway's invasion of Greenland with a naval operation which completely kicks the Norwegians out of the southern Baltic Sea and captures complete naval superiority over the Danish peninsula. We also see them capture this strategical island down here, which leads to a naval invasion of it, and we also see the complete annexation of all of the Danish peninsula, even going into Copenhagen, right off the shore of Norway down here in the south. So this is a little bit more complicated for Norway now because they no longer control all of the Baltic Sea, and they're being pushed back by the Russian Navy. Russia also additionally has access to the North Sea now, which allows them to send any shipping routes they need down over to West Africa and vice versa. And this little bit of an effort from Russia will allow for the West African country as well as the Dark Sign country to continue their push up against the Iberians, as the Iberians continue to greatly struggle against these two countries, and they almost completely lose access to the ocean whilst in this campaign, but a quick counteroffensive in the center of the country allows for them to breathe just for a little bit. Alright, so the square team so far has taken a little bit of a beating in the start of this video, but now it's time for the complete opposite to happen. Over in the Americas, Texas has of course been struggling to beat back the Americans and the Mexicans. Now of course the Americans and the Mexicans are at war with each other. They're fighting a naval battle in the Gulf of Mexico, but they do have common interest in wiping out all of Texas in order to fight against each other in this theater. And something that will greatly help out the circle and square teams over here just occurred and will most certainly spell defeat for Texas. Y'all know this little gray thing right here that exists? Yeah, well guess what? They're invading Texas. This little terrorist group, which has popped up a few episodes ago, is now active again as they seek to conquest more land from Texas in hopes of getting even more land and connecting more of their territories. Now Texas was planning an offensive against them, but after the World War III broke out, Texas decided to pull all of its troops from this front line in order to fight up against America and Mexico. Obviously, pulling your troops from this front line has left that front line pretty undefended, and with that comes invasion by the terrorist group that goes without really any defense. So these guys are pushing the heck out of Texas, and it's not looking too good for them. In the coming days, America will start a sweeping campaign across the entire front line, and this thing is moving fast as Texas starts to lose power. Eventually, the American spearhead will near right towards their capital, all the whilst the Mexican front is doing much of the same, sweeping through the south of the country. Eventually, Mexico and America come into contact and begin fighting each other. The fiasco over here in the east allows for the terrorist group to go ahead and capture Southern California, which is a huge blow towards Texas as they lose all access to the ocean. From here, it's pretty much over for Texas as the three groups all push into their territory. And after a few more weeks of fighting in the American front, we see Texas completely fold as it capitulates over to enemy forces. So Texas, they're the first cross country to get completely invaded and annexed. Like these guys have capitulated, but they do still exist because their allies are holding them up. Oh yeah, but Texas is completely gone. And now begins the fighting between America and Mexico, whilst still in Texas. At first, America does have the advantage, pushing in and taking the capital city of Texas, and then pushing down against them. But after some resupplying by the Chinese, Mexico pushes right back and recaptures the city, and this will be pretty back and forth for the rest of the war. Now the terrorist group, they did invade a cross-team country, but they did not see a declaration of war from Russia and their allies, meaning that they could technically just make a peace treaty with Texas right now and get out of the war. But for the sake of me creating the peace treaty in World War III in next episode, I need to go ahead and not do that because then it would all get undone and that would be a mess. So yeah, just know that they technically could make a peace treaty with Texas right now if they wanted to. Alright, so now we go back over to Afro-Eurasia where the fighting will continue. In the Central Asian front, the Old Empire will continue to push back the Green Team over here in the western area, while the Green Team pushes them back over here in the east. But now the Old Empire will start a new campaign, this time focused at Central Asia and Central Asia only, because they see strategical importance in capturing this area. So they will focus in on the remnants of this lighter green country here and take out almost the entirety of the thing. They will then move into the pink team a little bit more, and ultimately they end up going back and capturing all of this anyway, continuing their push into the pink team. We also see a slight pushback over here against the green team, but this doesn't go too far because once again the green team has a massive army. Now they're not totally like all trained to highly professional soldiers. Their equipment of course is outmatched by the Old Empire, but they just have pure numbers on this front line. Like I said, they are militarizing a good percentage of their population for this war. Now over here to China in their front line, we see a big switch up in the war as they gain complete control over this area, kicking Russia out of the gold team, and the gold team starts an offensive of its own into Russian territory. Now why is Russia getting cooked back all of a sudden? Well, they have decided that they are going to take a good portion of their military over here, kind of push it back to a certain point over here to form a defensive front, and take all the extra and push it down here against the old empire. Russia and the old empire right now are currently kind of evenly matched. It's not because they are like putting their all against each other, it's mostly because both of these countries have their armies pretty spread out. The old empire, of course, is fighting two fronts over here. They are also sending troops into the Iberian country and attempting to send troops up into Norway. They also have a large number of troops on the front line over here in case China ever breaks through. As for Russia, of course, they have their two front lines over here, but they're also sending troops probably into West Africa and fighting Norway, as well as China, so they definitely have their troops very spread out, which is why they want to bring back a good chunk from here and push them against the old empire. Knowing this is coming, though, the old empire will take initiative and start a large-scale offensive right here in this little part of Russia, kind of far east of their capital, but still kind of close to it. And the reason they're focusing over here is because Russia's defenses are the weakest over here, obviously because they have this big chunk of land right here which they have captured without much resistance. So they will start an offensive going north and take a major Russian city. Granted, it has been nuked, but still a major city nonetheless. And from here they will start their push west, kind of making a little bit of a spearhead formation, but not completely kind of committing to it. But their goal, of course, is to go city hopping from this one to this one to this one, and eventually their capital city, in hopes of knocking Russia out of the war and maybe even ending the War of the Greats. One small issue though for the old empire, and that is that they are just failing to take the front in the Balkans. Logistical problems are existing here, and they are severely preventing the old empire from taking back the white country. And because of these logistical issues, Russia is once again able to push out into old Iberian territory and start taking some of these major cities. The leader of the old empire is really mad about this, and he begins to fire some of his top generals that are responsible for the Balkan area, and this creates a lot of controversy within the military, as the old empire's leader looks to consolidate power, make himself a military dictator, and pretty much try to go all out against their enemies. This does not stand well with the civilian population. Anyway, once again, he is still getting beat back over here in the Balkans, and before his changes can take effect, they reach all the way down to the Aegean Sea, cutting off Greece from the old empire. That's not good. What's also not good is a Russian landing in southern Norway, taking a major city and the entrance to the Baltic Sea. Alright, that's not good, and it looks like the old empire is gonna get beat here pretty bad. They do still have all of their claims over here in Central Asia, but that land is nowhere near as valuable as the land that they have lost in Ukraine and Romania, even in Denmark. But at the same time, what's also is Russia losing all of the brown team, followed by even more advances by the red team now into their own territory, and continued advances by the gold team, who just captured a major city, which is kind of surprising. The gold team is not very strong. But we also see Chinese tanks now rolling right through Russian territory, and it doesn't look good for Russia over here in the east. Somebody's got to do something, or else this is going to get a little out of hand. Well, luckily for us, and luckily for your entertainment, every single one of these three countries has a trick up their sleeve. First of all, the old empire will go up north and recruit a new ally. How far north? Well, look no further than Finland. I kind of alluded to this earlier when I said that Finland was allowing the Norwegians to dock in their ports, but now it's official. Finland joins the alliance of the old empire in hopes of kicking Russia away from their capital city and all their major cities, because they believe that Russia is the biggest threat to their existence. And this is like the perfect time to strike. Russia's all cut up in Denmark, they're all cut up in the southern Balkans, all of course in the old empire, and of course over here against China. So their northern border right here is probably really unprotected, right? Sort of. At first, Finland sees a lot of success in their pushback. Russia did have a little bit of territory here defended, but their defenses were overall really weak compared to the entirety of the Finnish military. So Finland is able to do a lot of damage at once, circulating in this major city and also threatening this one. Navy-wise, Finland doesn't really have much of one. It's really just like right here, and of course they would share it with Norway, but Norway is currently occupying all this waters up here, which means that the bulk of the Finnish Navy is right here, and this would be a very strong and powerful strip of naval forces, since it is once again their entire navy. So they will fight back against the Russians here, and they will have a little bit of success. They meet up with some land borders of Russia, which is, you know, near Estonia, and it looks pretty good for Finland at first, but then Russia sends some more ships up north, and this little offensive dies pretty quickly. They do still hold out, protecting their coastal areas, but it's unlikely that we'll see the Finnish Navy do anything, and we'll mostly be looking at their army, of course, in Russia. Now, I did say that there's some other countries with tricks up their sleeve, but this event isn't really by coordination of Russia or China. This is more of a solo event happening fighting on its own, but nonetheless, it will greatly help both the old empire and Russia in this war. And I'm looking over here at East Asia. What do we know about East Asia? Well, to be honest with you, it's been a really long time since we've covered like the lore and the backstory of this region, but what we do kind of remember is that Vietnam didn't used to be called Vietnam. Vietnam used to be called Southern China. They were forced down into Vietnam by Chinese forces who overran them. They even ran them out of the Orange Team's territory, which was basically their own for a long time. And now Southern China is Vietnam. But, you know, they probably want revenge, right? You know who else probably wants revenge against China? Korea. These two have history against each other. So what am I getting at here? Well, I'm getting at the creation of a new triangle alliance, this time in East Asia, between Vietnam and Korea. As of lately, or I don't want to say lately, but as of the last like 10 or maybe 15 episodes, Korea has been on a little bit of an expansive run, invading countries like the Seafoam Green country and a little bit of Japan. They've been trying to reclaim their early empire, and they've done well so far, but in order to initially and fully do that, they need to go after China. And luckily for them, there's a country just south of China that also wants a little bit of revenge. So they will form a coalition against the Circle Team, which includes China, Southern China, or this is the fake Southern China, but Southern China nonetheless. Tibet, I guess you can call this, and the Gold Country. Oh yeah, in the Orange Country. Oh yeah, in Mexico. Okay, I think that's all of them. But this coalition is going to really distract the Circle Team, and they're striking them when, of course, they're fully focused on the Russian front line. In a surprise attack by both the Koreans and the Vietnamese, we have a large-scale invasion taking place both in Southern China and in Northern China. Now, Korea, of course, will have a lot of work to do because this is where China is more populated. This is where most of their defenses lie. If I can find the right layer, there we go. We can see all of China's major cities right here. We can see their capital right there. And this will be no easy task for the Triangle Coalition. Now, in terms of navy, this is what our map is looking like. China's navy is kind of forming like a wall going from Taiwan down to the Philippines. Very useful. You can ask Japan in World War II. But Korea also has a very expansive navy protecting all of their island territories. Now, most of their navy is going to be fighting on this front line between them and China. So this defenses take them very lightly. It's unlikely that they're sending too many naval vessels to defend these territories. Otherwise, though, Vietnam and this southern Chinese country, they're having a full-on naval war. It's probably going to be one of the most brutal naval battles in this war, minus whatever's happening up here. But yeah, these two start their invasions, and they go very well in the beginning stages of the war. There's not much resistance to be had, and Vietnam makes the first major accomplishment in capturing the southernmost city of South China. In the ocean, these two navies will continue to fight up against each other, with Vietnam having an upper hand at first, pushing back the southern Chinese navy and completely surrounding this island of which the South Chinese claim. We will very quickly see a naval invasion of this island, which goes extremely successful for the Vietnamese country, and from there they will continue to push back the Southern Chinese Navy. With the opening of a new front between Korea and Vietnam, Russia is able to sort of save itself a little bit, and they push back against the Chinese very slightly, but also very efficiently. Elsewhere, we see Russia take back another major city, and the old empire's expansion into this region is halted. We also see more of a push into the Greek peninsula area, taking a couple more major cities and also sweeping the Greek coast, but they do lose a little bit of land from an offensive by the old empire heading west. They also begin to head north and take two major cities, but are eventually stalemated. Now the Russians, they really need their navy to get down here to the Mediterranean and to start fighting against the old empire, because if they're unable to do that, they are unable to win this war. Taking a look at the old empire's navy, they have complete control over the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea over here in the east, so Russia needs to do something about that. They can try to start launching ships right here, but that's unlikely to go well because the old empire would simply just have a few destroyers shoot that from happening, just blow them up. So good luck with that. Your best bet is to kind of sweep this area and then take, complete coastal control of this area, which they already have, and try to launch boats there. But once again, if you can't get any air support to stop the old empire's navy, you're kind of cooked. So they are just relying on their armies to do their job right now. Back up in Finland, the encirclement of this city finally leads to its capturing, as well as this city, and Finland is absolutely rolling, heading towards where St. Petersburg would be in the modern day. They are stopped though, and that is as far as they're going to get. Now, Norway has been focusing in on their own front line, which is going well. They retake all of southern Sweden and are once again pushing into Copenhagen. Their navy is also pushing back effectively, taking over northern Denmark and all of the waters that surround Copenhagen, and that influx of oil from Greenland is helping them a lot right now. Over back in Iberia, where this front line has become completely stalemated. Iberia has been suffering from lack of planning and lack of total preparation for a possible world conflict, so they got pushed back pretty bad at first. first, but after getting their head out of the sand, they've done some pretty good counteroffensives against the West African country. In terms of power, these guys are pretty similarly matched, which is why we see the Dark Side team in this war giving the Cross team a little bit of an advantage. That little extra push for them has allowed for this, of course, that little push for them has allowed for this offensive to take place. But like I said, the Iberian country is now locked in, which means that they're able to push back against some of these offensives which have occurred. Back over in Central Asia, we have a new strategy appearing for the Circle team. With China and South China kind of being distracted with Korea and Vietnam now, we see that the Gold team and the Red team are kind of given responsibilities over this flank over here. China will hold a defensive front here while they deal with Korea, and that just leaves these two to kind of do whatever they want. They draw up a plan to invade into Central Asia and take out the Green team, allowing for them to then push into the Purple/Old Empire. First of all though, shout out to the Orange country. They're doing a lot of damage to the Old Empire's puppet state. They even do have a considerable amount of land from the Old Empire, but the Old Empire really isn't too focused on this front over here as of right now. But the Red team is. And the Red team will start an advance into Old Empyrean territory, kind of ignoring the Green team for now, but they do have plans for them. They instantly start heading towards this major city of the Old Empire and are able to capture it. Now, the Old Empire did just have a pretty good counteroffensive in this region, but the influx of Red team troops kind of caught them off guard and they were unable to defend against it. They're currently like located up here and kind of bending around. And the Green team sees this and they see opportunity. They cut down and take this major city, cutting off logistical support for the group of armies over here and head completely down south, leaving their western flank pretty vulnerable, but pushing on nonetheless. And it's here that the Red team kind of catches wind of what the Green team is doing, and they too start to move over towards the west. Now, while they are at war with each other, they do understand that the Old Empire is a bigger threat, and the Red team will complete the encirclement of about 200,000 Old Empyrean troops, the largest encirclement of this war thus far. A supreme general is captured within this front line, and the Green team is really excited about this. But the Old Empire isn't playing around, and they instantly start pushing into the encirclement, but not before the Green team itself launches 3 nukes into the center of this encirclement. Boom, boom, and boom, almost completely wiping out the armies of the Old Empire. This leaves them with 2 total nukes that they can use and drops Russia down to 24 and 21. So that was kind of dirty. A lot of the world would agree with that, but it does effectively wipe out all 200,000 of those Old Empyrean troops and also allows for the Green team and the Red team to sweep through this area, dealing with radiation, sure, but also taking the land. But also, like I said earlier, the Old Empire was not messing around with this front, and they instantly start sending their armies and push back against the Green and the Red team. But alas, the damage is pretty much already done, as the Old Empire's main army fighting against the front over here has been destroyed. This army that's fighting right here is actually from up here, and the logistical nightmare for the Old Empire continues as the Green team now pushes back into this territory, which was pretty much just abandoned by the Old Empire. And their front, where they made the landing from the Caspian Sea, is almost completely destroyed. We also see the Green team expand its front line into territory that they just lost, following the retreat of the Old Empire's army from this area in order to form a consolidated front line right here. But once again, the damage has pretty much already been done. And the Green team will push back greatly against the Old Empire in one of the largest victories for an enemy against the Old Empire in history. They've never been beat back this bad before. And of all countries, it's the Green team that does it. Okay, so these two have kind of worked together to fight against the Old Empire. All right, that was short-lived. The Red team will start attacking Green team troops on this front line. They were kind of just in a ceasefire, but that didn't last long, like I said. The Red team knows how this war started. They know that they were the ones that were nuked, and they're not holding back. The amount of front lines that this country has is honestly kind of ridiculous. They have 3 different colors. Actually, no, scratch it. They have 4 different colors. 1 into Russia, 1 into the Brown team, 1 into the Green team, and 1 into the Old Empire. They're going all out. And you know who else is going all out? The Orange team against the Old Empire's puppet state. They are just kicking butt. So much so that the Orange team is now entering its own troops into Old Empyrean core territory, which is a big yikes for the Old Empire. Have no fear though, counteroffensive is here, and this goes very well in the Greek peninsula, and they almost are able to completely connect up their land. In fact, they do, leaving Russia kind of on a retreat from the southern Greek area. But oh god, the troops are here and they are moving fast. Russia is able to completely push the Old Empire out of central Russia all the way back down to the front line. Additionally, we also see the pink team reclaim its capital with the help of the Russians, and it looks like the old empire is once again kind of on the fraud watch. Heading back over here to Korea and China, this front line has become very interesting. So Korea is now pushing out from all areas. They captured a major Chinese city or two, and they're heading down from the north. But the reason they're heading down from the north is because the Chinese launched a counteroffensive over here in the east that has gone very well, and they recapture a majority of their territory, and even send a small army into Korea in order to just kind of mess things up, maybe. There are a lot of Korean cities on the border of China, so that is probably their goal. Additionally, on the naval front, Korea's navy has gotten they've gotten beat pretty bad, and they are now kind of on the retreat towards their own island. China makes a landing in the southern tip over here, capturing another major city, but in the south it is kind of a different story. Vietnam is absolutely steamrolling southern China. They have captured now 3 major cities. Their navy has pushed back the yellow team navy almost completely, and the Vietnamese navy is now fighting the Chinese navy, which is kind of wild because the whole southern Chinese navy has been destroyed. But these guys mean business. They are kind of like the green team in the sense that they are just fueled by hatred and revenge. And that hatred and revenge is working in their favor, much like the green team. And they are just sweeping through southern China. And they are definitely threatening that capital city, which is only a few hundred miles away from the front line. Actually, I'm not sure how long. Is that like 100 miles maybe? Probably a little bit more. I don't know. I'm not good with distance. But yeah, ouchie. You know what else is ouchie? Yeah, this counteroffensive. That's ouchie. Now you might be wondering, why are nuclear bombs not being used more? I mean, there were 9 nuclear bombs in Texas, and they didn't fire them off before they got completely invaded. Well, that's because the world is terrified of nuclear bombs. They know what happened over here. They see all these green dots. They see what has happened because of these green dots. And the only countries that are willing to use nukes are the countries that are freaking insane, like the green country. We saw what they did over here. That was definitely a war crime. That is definitely, like, if you lose this war, you're gonna have a few people executed because of this. But they're just not willing to really use nukes. Texas, they know that they were going to lose this war. They know they were going to be completely occupied, but they still decided not to fire off their nukes because they don't want, first of all, their own people to die, but they also don't want the side effects of nuclear bombs to devastate half the world. There is a huge radiation cloud over this region of the world, and I think it's probably hurting and killing a lot of people, but they don't care. So what I'm basically saying here is that it's unlikely that we see nuclear bombs used too much throughout the rest of this war because of the effects that they're happening, but also because there are a few countries that are just completely depleted of nukes. The old empire has 7, Russia has 3, China has 23, which is a lot, but they're still unlikely to use them. And yeah, anyway, the old empire needs a new strategy. Their current method is not working. They are trying to do a counteroffensive over here while also doing an offensive over here and trying to do an offensive over here. It's just too much offense. They need to play a little bit of defense. So their new strategy is this. We're going to fall back to a certain point over here, about this much. We're going to protect this major city with everything that we have. And we're going to set up a kind of line over here in this mountainous-ish region. Then we're going to focus our offensive capabilities over in this region in the northern Caspian / the Caucasian front. Their plan is to simply go up and get the capital of Russia and knock them out of the war. Simple enough, right? No, they've been struggling to do that. So they're also advising a plan to go after southern Ukraine. Retaking that would give them a staging ground to launch said spearhead up instead of having to go all the way around over here. Now, as for this front line, they're not too sure what to do. And that's because neither country really knows what they want to do in that area. Now, Russia wants to capture it all, of course, and the old empire wants to push it all back, but they've been really unsuccessful in doing both. The old empires hold a really bad defense, and Russia has had a really bad offensive front. Now, they did get far before, but that's because of the reimbursement of troops from China. Those troops are now all used up, and it still resulted in a stalemate. So Russia's strategy in this front is to basically just go all out on this area, maybe, because if you can capture all of this Greek area, you can probably start putting ships in the Mediterranean, but they just kind of need a little bit of help. So Russia will go down to Libya, and they're going to be like, hey, can you join this war in order to like destroy the old empire's navy? And Libya looks over at Russia, and they're like, are we for real? The last couple of times that Libya has fought the old empire, it hasn't gone particularly well for them at all. So I highly doubt that Libya would want to join in on this war at this very moment. They refuse. Dang, said Russia. And there aren't any other countries in the Mediterranean that would be willing to fight up against the old empire. They're friendly with the African Union, of course. They're at war with the West African country, but their navy isn't going to be able to do too much after getting this far away. France and the dark purple country are neutral. The purple team is aligned with the old empire, and that's really about it. So they'll just have to do it themselves. And do it themselves they do, because they have one of the most successful offensives in World War III thus far, pushing the old empire almost completely out of the southern Balkan area and back to mainland Turkey. From here, they're able to push down into Greece, but take heavy losses in the amount of naval bombardment they are receiving from the old empire's navy. All looks to be going well until something happens that will completely shift the tide of this war. The purple team will join the square alliance on the side of the old empire and start 2 new front lines against Russia. The Russians had a feeling that this could happen, but they weren't prepared for it, and now the purple team will look to start an expansionist quest into the white team, reclaiming old Iberian land in the south and invading up into the south of Russia's 2 puppet states. This is huge. Almost immediately, their impact is felt as purple team troops pour across the front line into the white team country. They also work with the old empire to reclaim some of their land down here in the south, and the purple team starts an invasion into the south of this orange country, taking 3 major cities within the first couple of weeks. In World War III, and the War of the Greats has just become even greater. With this new issue opening up, Russia is kind of in the cooked scenario now. They're fighting a really big front line against the old empire and their allies. But luckily, China is still distracted with Korea and Vietnam, which gives Russia a little bit of a chance. But they need help. They can't do this alone, and they will go down to the West African team, and they're basically gonna be like, yo, we need you to like Godspeed send on the Iberian country and come help us because we're gonna get cooked without your help. We need you to fight the purple team in the old empire's navy in the Mediterranean. We need you to make some landings. We need you to send troops to us. We need your help, okay? They're gonna try against the Iberians, but once again, these guys are pretty evenly matched, and even with a very large offensive campaign effort, the West African country is not able to reach the capital of the Iberian team, although they do take a lot of land along with the Dark Cyan team. And you know what would be really funny right now? A little bit of revenge, huh? The French and dark purple countries will form a coalition against the Iberian country in the interest of receiving old lands that were lost and a little bit of revenge for World War II. Now, with them entering the war, it does bring up the question of, is this an act of invasion against the old empire because they're attacking their ally? But unfortunately for the Iberian country, somebody snitched. And the snitcher just so happens to be France. France figured out that the Iberian country had gone behind closed doors and signed an agreement with the West African country to not use nukes against each other. The old empire figured this out by France, and they're like, dang, behind our back? Really? Now Russia also finds out about this, but since they're not as petty as the old empire, they're basically just gonna brush it off and be like, I mean, you're still helping us, so it's whatever. But the old empire, on the other hand, they're like, all right, you're gonna go behind our back. You're demanding all my resources, all my troops to protect you and keep you alive. Good luck. The old empire essentially abandons its ally in the Iberian Peninsula, and how unfortunate that is, because the French team, knowing this, will now invade them, taking 3 major cities in the first couple of days. The Dark Purple team will also start advancing into Iberian territory, which is largely undefended due to the fact that the Iberians did not foresee something this diabolical happening to them. But what we see happening over the next couple of months is the complete annihilation of the light blue country, also known as the Iberian country, which has been around for quite a while now. The country doing the most damage is now going to be the West African country, who no longer has to worry about the entirety of the Iberian country's forces focused on them. They'll push up and capture a major city that is just outside of the capital of the Iberian country, and with major strides made by all other contributing countries, we eventually see their capitulation and surrender to the West African country, and the Iberian country is wiped out of the war, allowing for the West African country to now focus their naval assets on fighting the old empire in the Mediterranean, also allowing them to send troops up north to fight both Norway and aid Russia. This is a huge momentum swing for the cross team. So as stated, the West African country will now send its naval forces out eastward in hopes of fighting both the purple and the old empire's navies. Now this is kind of far from home from them, so it's going to be a little bit complicated. And they also have to be really careful about this country right here, because they are aligned with the old empire. However, they have stated neutrality, but they also hate you because of the civil war, so just be careful. Now as for the purple team, they are doing their part. They are carrying their weight, and they have taken out the southern Russian puppet state, now pouring into the northern Russian puppet state. They take 2 major cities, and then they meet the Russian armies, and that starts not going too well for them. However, though, their damage has been really helpful because it's allowed for the old empire to push back around all of the coastal areas in the Aegean Sea and start their counteroffensive against the Russians, which goes extremely well. And once again, we see these two kind of fighting in a stalemate in this region. This time, it's a little bit different though, because with the help of the purple team, they're able to take back all of their land from Russia and start an invasion into the shadow puppet government of the white team, which has been annexed and kind of made into, like I said, their puppet by Russia. This goes extremely well, and they reach very far north, all the way up to the original Russian border, and now Russia might be in a little bit of trouble. The purple team will continue out its offensive, taking 2 more major cities from the white team. But then something really bad happens. The Russians will invade into the blue country, going completely through it and down to the border of the purple team in a very quick manner. And from here, the Russians will start invading into the purple team, taking a major city and threatening to cut this country right in the two. Quickly, purple team forces will work to occupy the remaining area of the dark blue country, but their efforts might be a little bit too late because a bulk majority of the Russian army has already penetrated deep into the purple team's territory. This quick advance, which is very blitzkrieg-like, also makes the purple team pull back some of their armies over here, which allows for Russia to reinforce this front line, and in an astounding victory against the old empire, the Russian military pushes them very far back down south. At this point, the world is regarding Russia's military as the best in terms of logistics and advancement strategy. At this point, the world is also looking at the old empire's military and regarding them as one of the most disorganized and unlogistical military in this conflict. This is really confusing now, because who's gonna win the war? So picking up where we left off, we saw Russia start an invasion into the purple country after going through the dark blue one. This invasion goes so well that they almost reach the coast of the purple country. All the logistical failures on the front of Russia, which has not happened at all during this war, and this is the first logistical issue that they've ever had, lead to the purple team cutting deep into dark blue team territory and hurting the supply lines of Russia, and thus allowing for a slight pushback from the purple team. They take back a major city in the south, and with the old empire's advances into the white country, it does look like they're about to capture the capital of this previous country, although another stalemate takes place, delaying that event. We also see Russia push back the purple team in the white team's territory all the way back to this strip of land. Over in Norway, we see the Norwegian army make a landing in the Danish peninsula, allowing for them to take the north of the peninsula and then move south, taking this major city and almost completely kicking the Russians out of Denmark. As for the Norwegian navy, they're able to push back the Russians over here in the west and all around the Danish peninsula, allowing for them to recapture the waters around both this small island and this large island, and subsequently in the following days they take back both islands, which is a huge military victory for Norway, who had fortified this island previously, and this is also one of the best military bases in the world on this island. They needed it back, and they got it back, and this will be huge for the rest of the war. Now, up in Finland, things aren't going as well as they were before, as Russia now starts to push back against the Finnish. Their campaign against them goes extremely well, and they even enter into Finnish territory. Over here with Vietnam and Korea, some different things are happening. First of all, China is able to push Korea all the way back out of their own territory and start a massive offensive of their own, taking a few major Korean cities in the upcoming days of the war. Down south though, as we know, it is a completely different story, as the Vietnamese country is absolutely steamrolling the southern Chinese country. They take their capital city in the surrounding area, and this will almost completely capitulate this country. As it turns out, this country was actually almost completely defended by China. They have a very small military. It's kind of comparable to the National Guard of a few countries. That's how small it is. Now, they did have a navy and they had an air force, and of course those two things had their own personnel, but when it comes to their actual conventional army, they did not have a lot of manpower and did not have a lot of troops within that army. And that's mostly why we see Vietnam having so much success here. The southern Chinese are simply unable to defend themselves. And with them pretty much knocked out of the war, aside from a few major cities, Vietnam is now making advances into Chinese territory from the south, taking 2 major cities. And whilst China knew that their southern ally was weak, they didn't think they would get beat back this early. And that causes them to have to send some troops from this northern front line all the way down to the south to hold off the Vietnamese, which allows Korea some small land gains that are actually huge victories as they take back 4 major cities from Chinese occupation. Elsewhere though, it's not looking too good, as Korea's navy gets completely beat back by the Chinese all the way around the Korean peninsula in the west. This leads to a lot of bombardment by the Chinese Navy on the actual peninsula of Korea, but no amphibious invasion attempt is made simply because it would be too costly at this point. Back over in the Americas, we see the United States country, that's I guess what I'm calling it now. They go ahead and take a large portion of Mexico's occupied land from Texas and move down the coastal areas. Now in terms of power, America is a lot stronger than Mexico. However, Mexico is receiving way more foreign support than America is. China is actively sending troops and all other equipment and military stuff to Mexico to help them in this war, whereas America is pretty much on their own. Outside of Norway, who is shipping them any oil supplies they need, the old empire has been pretty quiet, and that's mostly because they are kind of stuck from getting over there. Remember, any shipment that the old empire makes to one of its allies has to go all the way around Africa and up through here or over through here. The West African country does control the entrance into the Mediterranean Sea. Now the old empire is going to try to do something about that. They move their navy towards the west and meet up with the navy of the Dark Cyan team, and a huge naval battle takes place around the waters of the African Union, who is probably a little bit mad about this. But these two navies engage each other, and the tactics of the West African Navy overwhelm the navy of the old empire, and this is their first major naval defeat in the war, and it pushes them all the way back to Sicily. Now with a little bit of confidence, the Dark Cyan team and the West African country will send even more of their navies east and engage the old Iberian navy, and they keep winning these battles. Alright, that's not good. The old empire is very aware that that is not a good thing. But now they will just go ahead and hold a defensive front over here and focus back in on Russia. But first, let's try to take back some of our own territory. The old empire makes an amphibious landing in the southern tip of Crimea, and through a very bloody battle, they make their way up the peninsula and through around the Sea of Azov. From here, land gains are started over here in the east and take back a major city right where Mariupol sort of is, and from here they're able to connect their front lines. This is huge. Then the old empire goes on the offensive in Russian territory, taking these two major cities, and now focusing a brunt of their forces in this area. Old Imperial troops move north, reclaiming old territory and taking another major Russian city, before starting a sweep throughout this part of the country, taking back one of their own cities and moving up and taking yet another city. And now the spearhead is starting to form as the old empire gathers some of its best militaries to move north towards the capital of Russia. But one major issue exists, a disagreement between the leader and another major military general. The general warns the leader that Russia will form a counteroffensive and spearhead right through this, which would be an absolute dagger of a punch towards the old empire, because it would cut off so many supply lines. And what that general also doesn't know is that Russia is mounting a counteroffensive over here as well in order to completely encircle these troops right here. So the general warns the leader of a possible Russian counteroffensive right here, but the leader does not care. The leader wants to end this war as soon as possible and get his revenge on Russia, and ultimately China, but first Russia. So the leader fires that general, sends him home, and decides to go with his plan of just spearheading right towards the Russian capital. Troops begin to mount and go north, and so far the spearhead is successful as they gear right towards the Russian capital. However, exactly what the general warned about is about to happen. The Russians will slam their forces right through here, cutting off a lot of the old empire supply lines. The damage is actually worse than predicted, as they're able to secure the coastal areas of the Sea of Azov as well. And when that counteroffensive forms that no one knew about, it's not good for the old empire, as they get cut off from their spearhead. And now, by the way, the Russians are slamming forces into these two spots right here. They are putting all of their defensive forces to prevent the old empire from linking back up with this grouping. Subsequently, they will lose out on a few other front lines, but this is part of their gamble. The front line over here in the White Country is almost completely lost, as forces that were stationed in the northern eastern area have all fled to this front line to do the invasion, of course. And it also almost allows for the re-establishment of the White Country. However, Purple Team forces are unable to take that capital just as of now. Speaking of Purple Team forces, they will have success in pushing the Russians back out of their country and starting an offensive into the Dark Blue Country, which could eventually be aimed at invading Russian territory near Poland. But back to this. Of the 400,000 troops stuck in this encirclement, they decided to make the decision to retreat back down to this old Iberian city right on the border of Russia. So most of the forces fall back, but are gunned down from behind, leaving the total force count around 350,000. Eventually, this city will be all that remains for the 350,000, and the most brutal battle of the war begins. And ironically enough, actually, never mind. I was going to say this is kind of close to Kursk, but Kursk is right here. Kursk was the bloodiest battle of World War II. This is more so like Kharkiv, if I had to guess, but that would have been cool if they lined up. But anyway, the most bloodiest battle of the War of the Greats takes place, and the old empire's forces are able to hold off the Russians until all of a sudden the Russian forces retreat out of the area. Cautiously, the old empire's forces here start to take back some of their land, but then a bright flash is seen over the top of the city, and all of the forces are wiped out in a nuclear strike. With the city nuked and the forces wiped out, the Russians can move back into this territory. We can update this, and the old empire's front line over here is collapsing. Very quickly, Crimea's front collapses as the Russians move back in, and the old empire is almost completely pushed back out of Russia. Now, how does the leader of the old empire react to 350,000 of his men being killed in a nuclear blast? Alright, that's understandable. 4 nuclear bombs land in the Russian capital city and its outskirts, killing millions of people. Additionally, we see 2 extra nukes dropped on this front line, killing tens of thousands of Russian troops that were advancing, and leaving the old empire with only 1 nuclear bomb remaining on their soil. Issue: they can't really import any nukes from their allies. These nukes here, they might have been captured. I actually didn't talk about that. I probably should have talked about that. However, as you'll notice, there are still some nukes that are outlying in other territory, such as the White Team. The old empire resecured those and moved them back to their own land, which means in reality, this number looks something like this, with 41 and 33, meaning that the old empire actually has 8 bombs of their own. And now Russia has a choice to make. They have 2 nuclear bombs, but the old empire just nuked their capital city, and yeah, that's not okay. Oh, okay. Wait, that wasn't Russia. The green team comes in and nukes the capital of the old empire, also killing millions of people and setting the leader in a fit of rage. They no longer have any nukes inside of their country. Russia now has even less, and the old empire is, well, they're kind of shaking, and not the good kind of shaking. The citizens of the old empire are getting a little riled up by the thought of their own capital city being nuked. This city is so historical, but now it has been basically destroyed. And this does one of 2 things. First of all, it fills the old empire with a wave full of nationalism. More and more people start to enlist in the old empire's military, although there probably was already a draft in place. But it also creates a little bit of hatred towards the old empire's government. So you get one thing, which is more enlistment, but also a little bit more hatred towards you. How do you balance those things? I don't know. We'll see. But with the nuking of this front line, there are no advances made by either country for a few weeks. Instead, fighting is focused elsewhere, more specifically over here on this front line. And something really bad is going to happen here for Russia. Norway has 10 nukes. Norway sees that their ally, the old empire, just got nuked in their capital city, and Norway is not too happy about that. So what does Norway do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 nuclear strikes on cities in Russia, leaving them with no nukes to defend themselves with. Also got to update this. We're running a little bit low on nukes, guys. But these bombings also destroy a large portion of Russia's nuclear supply that was stationed in case of a Norwegian attack on them. But the Norwegian nuclear strike on these territories does something really bad for Russia, other than, kill a bunch of people. It destroys their last 2 nukes, which were stationed in case of a Norwegian attack, meaning that Russia is left with 19 nukes, and none of them are within their own territory, and they can no longer launch any. That's not good. And also, as it turns out, a large bombing run was done on multiple Russian ports all along the Baltic Sea. This event was crippling for Russia. Not only do they lose access to the Atlantic Ocean earlier on, but now they're losing access to the entire Baltic Sea because the Norwegian Navy has just done one of the greatest naval events in history, wiping out almost all of Russia's navy. And of course, that was in large part thanks to the bombings that they did on the ports and also the nuclear strikes on cities which had factories that manufactured parts for the Russian Navy. All of their naval assets were in this region. That includes all of their shipbuilding components, all those factories. This is really bad for Russia. Now, Russia always believed that Norway wouldn't strike them as long as they didn't strike Norway. They believed that Norway really didn't care for the old empire as much as they really do, and that they wouldn't start a nuclear war with them. They were wrong. They essentially put all of their money on that event not happening, and it just happened. And their navy, like I said, is almost completely destroyed outside of this little area over here. With complete Norwegian domination in the Baltic Sea and little to no defenses by Russia, Norway makes a landing in these 2 Estonian islands. The Finnish navy engages the remainder of the Russian navy and wipes them completely out. And then we finally see an amphibious landing by Norway in the tip of Latvia. Norwegian troops have landed in Russia. You don't know what else is All of these nukes They just vanished. Nobody knows where they went. Okay, well, the truth is that the West African country actually stole 6 of them, meaning that they now have 6 nuclear bombs of their own, but they also have 10 Russian nukes on their territory. But nobody knows where the other 6 went. And this concerns the old empire a lot, because who just stole my nukes? We also see that Texas's nukes over here, they get stolen as well. 5 by the Americans, they now have 5 of their own and 11 of the old empires, and 4 by Mexico, giving them 4 of their own and 10 by China. So yeah, it turns out when your allies get invaded, you should probably take all of your nukes out of their territory. Now, all the supply of the Central Asian countries, they've all been exhausted and used or destroyed. It's not too good for them. But this also means that there are now 3 more nuclear powers in the world, along with the old empire, Russia, China, and the Brown Team. That's really concerning for the world because they really wanted to prevent the spread of horizontal nuclear proliferation, but ended up failing only because of this war. We'll see how this affects the world after this war, but for now, it's time to finish this thing. Russia is now a little bit worried about them losing this war. New front lines are appearing, one that should never have happened, but it is happening. And they still have their hands full over here in the Balkan area of Europe, where they probably shouldn't have invaded the dark blue country, but nonetheless, they did so anyway. So now they need to do something to turn the tide of the war in their favor. They need a new ally. But first, they kind of have to prove themselves that they're worthy of getting a new ally. So in the destruction that is this front line, they will finally start an advancement into the old empire themselves. Taking advantage of a very discombobulated country, the Russians are effectively able to move their military in and take land from the old empire for the first time since the beginning of the war. They capture 2 major cities with relative ease, and even start an invasion from the Crimean Peninsula, taking yet another major city. Now, the Circle team here, they see an opportunity. Now, of course, they're at war with Russia and the old empire, but who is the one that preemptively nuclear strike them? The old empire. The Russians didn't nuke them. I mean, they did eventually, but not at first. And they also know that a war with Russia would be prolonged and would probably never end. But a war with the old empire is a little bit more winnable. So behind closed doors between the red and the green countries, they will come to a mutual agreement to stop fighting amongst their own front line. And this, of course, is a direct violation of both the Chinese and Russian alliances, but this is once again behind closed doors, kind of similar to what Iberia and West Africa did. The heads of the alliances are relatively unaware of this, mostly because they don't have any troops fighting on this front line in particular. So they lie to their alliance members. They say that they're still holding, like, for example, the red team's still holding this, but in reality, they had given it back to the green team and are now working together to fight back against the old empire, and this combined force is doing damage, mostly because of the logistical failures in this region by the old empire early on in the war. But after the green team takes 3 major cities from them, the world is starting to look at the old empire like, hey, you gotta fight back, dude. You're starting to lose. Have no fear, though. The counteroffensive is here. The old empire recaptures the capital of the white team and starts to sweep through this territory once held by Russia. It all looks to be going better for the old empire. Even the purple team is starting to carry their weight a little bit more on this front line, pushing back the Russians greatly. However, the most concerning thing is that the old empire has been unable to stop the Russian advances in the northern Caucasus. As it turns out, this stems from yet another disagreement amongst the leader and his military officers. Finally, though, he gives in and he listens to his officers, and they make the decision to fortify this area and regroup the armies in order to push back against the Russians in one last attempt to take the Russian capital city, this time having 2 major offenses, one going from this side and one going from this side. The leader compromises, he likes to plan, and he lets his generals run the show, and the old empire is able to stop Russia's advances. However, the old empire loses all gained ground over here in this territory, which allows for the re-establishment of this teal country after their capital city is recaptured by cross-team forces. With this big victory for the cross-team over here, the old empire is essentially on the counteroffensive over here, as the dark green and teal team work to kick them out of this territory, although they are unsuccessful in doing it completely, as the old empire holds a solid footing right here. Also, it turns out for the purple team, they aren't built for this. Now, not in the way that like they're gonna lose or anything, but the Russian army, especially the one that is stationed in the northern German puppet state, is well, they're doing a lot of things that the purple team doesn't like. Like, for example, beating back their armies. A lot. Okay, so purple team now all of a sudden getting cooked. Not good for the square team at all. And the Norwegians are kind of refusing to start a new offensive into northern Germany because they have this foothold over here that they are continuing to work on and expand. Additionally, Finland is also hesitant to invade any further. They're more so looking for like a peace agreement with Russia to exit the war, but Russia isn't coming to the table just yet. Now let's go ahead and talk about this front line over here. It's kind of much of the same. While the Chinese are sending armies back down south to help out their southern ally, it's kind of not enough. Vietnam came into this war very prepared scared, and like I said, they have the mindset of the green team. They just want to take back their own land, and they have a ton of hatred towards the Chinese. Up north, Korea is trying. They do get all the land back over here, but against the number 2 power in the world, they're just kind of not in a good spot. Now, Korea itself is a strong country, top 15, maybe even top 10. In fact, I would say top 10. And even though China is fighting a 2-front war, it still kind of isn't enough. So they're thinking about a ceasefire or maybe a white peace with China in order to kind of save themselves. But the Vietnamese country is having none of that. And after the full capitulation of the southern Chinese country over towards the Vietnamese country, they have revenge on their mind and want to continue to move forth. They invade a few more cities in southern China, and in an astonishing naval victory, they encircle the waters around Taiwan, a key military institute for China, as they have a lot of naval bases and army bases stationed here. Losing Taiwan would basically lose their connection to the Philippines as well, and you don't want to do that because you also have a lot of military stuff down here. China's kind of put in like a chokehold by Vietnam in this case, and Korea is even able to do a major counteroffensive up north, encircling some Chinese troops in the tip of this area over here. While they're evacuating, they are bombarded by artillery, and the Chinese end up losing a ton of troops. But now with all their territory back, and really what should not have been possible but was able to be possible thanks to Vietnam, Koreans are once again on the offensive against China. They take a major Chinese city right here, and now the people of China are calling for China's exit of World War III. Remember when I first started the war, the support for war in China was 20/80 at the start of the war, and then after the nukings it was more 40/60. Well, that is now back down to 20/80, and in fact, it's actually beyond that. It's now at 10/90. Only 10% of China's population, which is one of the biggest population bodies in the world, is in support of World War III. And when your population doesn't support war, you often get thrown out of office. And that's exactly what happens in China. China's leaders are thrown out of office via citizen arrest. Kind of like January 6th, where you had a bunch of dumb people go into the Capitol building. This time, it's actually successful. And they get in there, and they're like, yo, you're done. China throws out its government. The citizens take over. And with that, China will be forced to exit the war, leaving all of these claims to their invaders of Korea and Vietnam. This is an insane event. This is a groundbreaking, war-changing, tide-changing, whatever you want to call it. This is the largest event of the war so far. With China's exit out of the war, they're leaving their 2 allies in the gold team and the red team on their own. Oh yeah, also the orange team. They're there. I keep forgetting about them. But these guys are now on their own. And in a way, they essentially kick China out of the Circle Team Alliance, and they will now fight this war on their own. Additionally, we also see Korea and Vietnam stop fighting because they have essentially gotten what they wanted, victory against China. But before the official ceasefire is signed, Korea will take a little bit more land and a few more cities just because, you know, they joined the war to do exactly that, and they're not going to leave the war without doing exactly that. So after upping their war score, if you will, they finally signed the ceasefire, and the war in the East Asian theater is over. China has left the war, and now the Cold War is fought on between the old empire and Russia, as well as Central Asia. Now let's talk about them. What are they going to do? Well, quite frankly, they have no will to fight anymore. They were only fighting because of China. The red team has a little bit more motivation because they were directly nuked, which is what brought China into the war, by the way. So they kind of want to keep fighting. But as for the gold team, they're good. They're going to sign a ceasefire with Russia. They promise to relinquish all lands that they conquest in exchange for peace. Russia agrees to that, and they sign a ceasefire, and this effectively also kicks the gold team out of the Circle Alliance and just leaves these 2 fighting, and they will continue to fight. Now, as for China's lands, they signed a ceasefire with both Russia and the old empire, meaning that they will have to relinquish this land. And they're now dealing with their own internal issues and government, and will sort out a peace deal with Vietnam and Korea following the peace deal of the War of the Greats. So let's actually end this war now. With one less front to worry about for Russia, things are gonna go a lot better for them. More specifically, Central Asia is now completely focused on fighting the old empire. Remember, there is a peace agreement, or not a peace agreement, but kind of like a behind the doors kind of agreement between the green team and the red team to not attack each other in order to attack the old empire. Yeah, that's working really well for them. They're now pushing into major city territories. These, of course, are major cities, but these cities right here, these are your important cities. You don't want to lose those. But yeah, the green team they're putting BTA. The red team also is kind of doing that as well. They're sweeping through old Empyrean territory over here in the east. All right, this isn't good, but Russia has one final trick up their sleeve. They're gonna make a call to an unlikely ally, one that the world hates, one that the world wants gone, but one that could help Russia win this war. Libya. Do you want to do the funny? And not just Libya. Remember, Libya is in an alliance. They're in an alliance with the gold team. Russia calls up the gold team and the red team, and they're like, yo, the old empire, we're kind of kicking their butt right now. You can see our advances. You can see that our alliance is kind of starting to gain momentum in this war. We turn the tide in our favor. China's gone. We can do this thing. The gold team and the red team will accept. And thus, they enter in to the cross team officially, and a new front line opens for the old empire on their southern borders. Remember how the gold team has a really strong leader who is very military orientated? Yeah, he means business. He takes all of Somaliland in a week. This dude's good at his job. He quickly starts moving up the territory of the old empire, and while he does not have an adequate enough navy to fight the old Iberian navy, he has the armies to do it. His strategies, his logistics are unfathomably good. And additionally, the Libyan country gets an early start on the old empire. They were not ready for Libya to join the war, and they start making progress in their old lands towards some major cities. And but now the old empire will go over to the Mediterranean country, and they'll be like, yo, remember all those times that we kind of saved you and bailed you out? It's time for you to help us. But the Mediterranean country will go ahead and continue to declare their neutrality, refusing to join the war to help the old empire. And it's like, bro, really? Whatever though, we are the strongest, we will win. They'll start a counteroffensive as planned back against Russia, and as predictably, the general's plan was right. It works. It's better. Cool. What's not so cool though is them losing their foothold over here in Central Asia, and that sucks for them because now they are technically on the defensive everywhere. They're defending down south, defending over here, defending in the Balkans, defending right here technically, and defending over here most importantly. But back down here, this is important. The gold team is committing the absolute worst atrocities ever seen in a war throughout these 4 major old empire cities. And there's videos released of them to the world, and the old empire citizens see this and they are like, whoa, that's too much. At this point, 95% of old Iberian citizens are calling for the end of the War of the Greats, but their leader wants to continue to fight on. In Russia, much of the same is happening because, well, most of their cities have been nuked at this point. In fact, Russia's infrastructure is almost entirely destroyed because of all these nuclear bombs. But the fighting will still continue on. The old empire's military makes some pretty good strides against Libya, now pushing up and taking their former capital city, which was this right here. They'll also wrap around and take this major city. And it looks like the old empire is sort of kind of bouncing back, but a major advancement has just been made. This is all of a sudden. But this is a pivotal point in the war because Russian scientists, or I guess engineers and mechanics, have just created the nuclear submarine, meaning that they can now launch nuclear bombs out of submarines. Russia is the only country with this technology. The old empire has been in the total war effort. They have abandoned any kind of major military research, such as like nuclear submarines, for example. But Russia, they've been continuing on with their research, and they developed this, and they send some nuclear subs down to West Africa, where there are 16 Russian bombs, where there are 10 Russian bombs, and of course 6 of West Africa's own. Now, of course, Russia itself, they don't have any nukes. They're all in Allied territory. So they give them to West Africa. West Africa will load the 3 nuclear submarines that they just received with, of course, 3 nuclear warheads, and send them out somewhere in the Mediterranean. Now, the old empire is aware of this, you know, sonar exists, but this terrifies them because they can now strike at any single point at any single major city. This also massively fuels the civilian population with fear, because at any point their city could just be, you know, vaporized. Now Norway over here, they're just kind of chilling. They're going to expand their little offensive around the whatever you want to call this right here, ocean sea thing. They're chilling, you know, they're chilling, but the old empire is freaking out. And with continued losses to the green team over here, I don't know what to say, but old empire needs to lock in. Major sweeps happen throughout the puppet state of the old empire, and offensives by the orange team capture a lot of land. Major uprisings are happening in the old empire now. More specifically in Africa, where these lands had previously sort of been annexed recently. There was some selling of land that happened, but nonetheless, the people in Africa are kind of sick of being ruled by the old empire. And this massive uprising presents itself. Guerrilla warfare fighting happens within all major cities over here, and the old empire loses its footing in Africa. What does that look like? Well, it looks something like this, with the rebellious country taking a majority of the land, but the red team and the gold team also taking a lot of land. With this, front lines across the old empire begin to collapse as the Russians start to pour in. Quickly, major cities begin to be captured by the Russians, and very soon they reach the Caucasus Mountains, where they are held off by old Iberian forces. Now, the old empire has some intense and insane geography. The Caucasian Mountains to the north, the Suez Canal over towards the west. Now, of course, there isn't a Suez Canal, but they probably dug one, just not called the Suez Canal. The whole ocean to their south, the Iranian Mountains to their west, and the strait right here between Istanbul and Europe to their east. Geographically, impossible to invade, right? Sure, from the outside, but from within, it's a lot more possible. Now though, the old empire is basically sending a cry for their troops to come home and defend their home territory to the last breath. The troops exit out of the white team, they stop holding any grounds there, and they leave the purple team to fend for themselves. This, well, you can kind of expect how this goes for them. They also get pushed back pretty well, to the point where they have no advances on the purple team's territory. Now with the Russians' major victories in the south, the Norwegians are going to continue to kind of just sneak around Russia, take some cities and stuff. Yeah, the Finnish, they also kind of do this. They kick the Russians out of their territory at least. And they also take some major cities up here, which is really confusing to the world because Russia is doing a lot of damage in the south towards the old empire all of a sudden, but they are losing a ton of ground up north. And as it turns out, the Russian state is collapsing. Not only is the Russian state collapsing, but the old empire is collapsing. There are too many fronts for both of these countries, and hence they are both starting to lose their grasp. The citizens of both countries are sick of the war, and while Russia is beating down the old empire, the final split will take place. A major rebellion will show its face in Greece, and this has the purple team stressing because like, oh my god, why did we even join this war? But this major rebellion is just one of many that will continue to break out, as another rebellion breaks out in the Bulgarian region. And Russia is quick to make peace with these rebellious areas. They do not want to fight them, because that would not be fun. They'll just kind of let them work their own magic. And the old empire's leader is going to be assassinated by his own citizens and taken out. There's been a lot of assassinations here recently. But with the death of their leader, the government of the old empire will officially collapse. The purple team will be very quick to sweep the Italian peninsula and take all of the old empire's claims in this area. They'll also be quick to take advantage of the confusion and invade into a few Russian areas in order to maybe force Russia into some kind of peace agreement. But the purple team is very smart about the final stages in this war. With the risk of rebellion mounting each and every day, the military of the old empire loses all of its morale. Eventually, a successful liberation campaign led by the orange team over here in the old empire's puppet state leads to its rebellion, and now another rebellious state exists against the old empire. The Libyan country will also seize their puppet state in Central Africa, and the old empire's navy will be forced to retreat to the motherland in order to protect their true core territory. They also back out of the Black and Caspian Seas, which will give Russia a chance to do something that they haven't been able to do this entire war: launch their boats against the old empire. Now, there aren't many. In fact, most of their naval stuff was destroyed when Norway attacked them, but they were able to save some boats, mostly because they weren't actually being built over here. They were being built somewhere in central-ish Russia as kind of like a backup just in case this happened, and it happened. But now they're launching them, and the Russian Navy does a lot of damage to the mainland old empire. There's a lot of artillery fire straight into the continental old empire, and now we see the complete collapse of the Iranian front for the old empire. And essentially what is a rebellion, kind of fueled by the green team, but also fueled by the newer dark blue team. They lose all of the land that is eastward of the Iranian mountains. Rebellious populations start to pop up in southern Turkey, and this rebellion eventually gains enough ground to start doing damage against the old empire's military, causing a complete collapse of the old empire's navy in this area, leaving Crete completely undefended, leading to a very brutal invasion by the Libyans of this peninsula, but it does end in a Libyan victory. And after the gold team troops are able to somehow skip rock and make landing in the south of the old empire, well, without a government and with the civilians kind of starting to do their own thing, I think it's pretty obvious what happens here. The old empire will collapse. Without a government to lead them and without military commanders that are competent enough to step up and take the position, the old empire's navy will completely vanish. Well, they're not going to vanish. They're just going to go back to port and kind of sit around and do nothing probably. But the old empire's navy is now useless. But right before the citizens agreed to terms of surrender with Russia and the cross team, one military general makes one final call, which is to exhaust the old empire of all of its nuclear supply and unload the remaining 8 bombs straight into Russia. They'll hit parts of the capital metropolitan area, which they missed initially, but will also hit some of these outskirt countries, and for good measure, they will drop one on the capital of the gold team. That does it for all of the old empire's nukes, and with Russia all out, the West African country will take initiative, firing all 10 of Russia's nukes straight into old empire territory via their nuclear submarines. Now, they will of course have to do this in rounds of 3 because they only have 3 nuclear subs, but these nukes effectively hit their targets, each wave killing hundreds of thousands and doing exactly what the citizens feared the most, killing more and more people. Remember, once again, these are tactical nukes, not super huge explosions, not world-ending explosions. But with the launching of those last few nukes, Russia's nuclear supply is completely gone. Russia and their alliance now have 0. Whereas with the old empire and the square team, there exists still more bombs, 23, which that doesn't add up. America has 11, which means that the old empire should only have 11. But they themselves have 11 nukes. They're not even on the same continent, so what's the point? And with the old empire looking like they're about to disappear, Norway and Finland will jointly submit a ceasefire to Russia to stop the fighting. The purple team, after fighting for a little bit more and taking a little bit more land, specifically in this dark blue country, and the Russian puppet state, will also sign a ceasefire with Russia, and with that, these 3 countries effectively leave the war. It is now the old empire in America. Oh, well, these 2 just signed a ceasefire as well. All right, it is now just the old empire, this African country, versus the cross team and the circle team. The citizen government surrenders. The old empire has collapsed. Their government doesn't work anymore. The citizens signed surrender to Russia and the cross team as well as the circle team. And the War of the Greats is over. Russia has won. But something happens as the Russian military moves into old Iberian territory and starts taking over their claims, of which they will soon sign a peace deal with. 10 more nuclear strikes will hit Russia over here near their capital. Russia's major cities are completely destroyed. Their infrastructure is destroyed and they can no longer respond to this attack, whoever did it. Now, who did it? Oh, the brown team nuked Russia. And while this war was fought between the superpowers of the world, between Russia, China, and the old empire, the brown team has been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The perfect moment for revenge. After losing World War II, the brown team lost tons of land to Russia. And while they did make amends with the old empire, they could never forgive Russia for what they did. The brown team's military will swiftly move through all of Russia's puppet states, taking back what was rightfully brown team territory. With an almost completely collapsed Russian state, the brown team sees little to no resistance in their advance. They sweep across Russia, and after getting near towards their capital city, Russia will be forced to surrender to the brown team, meaning that these territories down here gained by Russia will have to be forced into relinquishment by one of their allies, or more specifically, all of their allies. And since none of their allies ended up declaring war on the brown team, this is a one-on-one war between the brown team and Russia. So the brown team doesn't have to fight any of Russia's allies. They were smart enough not to declare war on the brown team. They know. No matter how close your allies seem, they will always betray you when it matters most, if you're losing. Anyway, the old empire's relinquishment will look something like this. This is temporary only until they work out an official peace deal to end World War III, but we also have to worry about a peace deal over here between the brown team and Russia. In the meantime though, the purple team will violate the ceasefire between them and Russia, sweeping through the territories of the white team, which they are allied with, by the way, and moving into Russian territory. They'll take a few major cities before meeting over with the claims of the lime green team, and will then force Russia to surrender to itself, despite already surrendering to the brown team, which kind of creates some tension between the brown team and the purple team here. But that's for some later episodes. And what would you know? Norway also violates the ceasefire, pushing deeper into Russian territory, and also taking a good chunk of land from them. Does anyone else want to violate Russia before they're gone? Alright, no. Russia, like I said, is going to finally surrender to all parties, but overall, the cross team is the victor of World War III. But it is kind of confusing, isn't it? The old empire lost, the Iberian country lost, but Norway and the purple team won, and the white team also technically won, but they're just colored in the wrong color right now. And America sort of won, but the old empire lost. China kind of just left. They're technically on the losing side. Russia won at first, and then all of a sudden the brown team came in and they lost. So it's kind of like confusing. So let's take a look at what these 4 decide to do with Russia. Okay, first things first, Russia will have to release both of its puppet states, the northern and southern German territories. From here, these 2 territories will be divided up by the purple, brown, and green teams. Said divisions will look something like this. A lot of respect towards the brown team, they are able to get a lot of their land back. So the Norwegian team will annex this land, and the purple team will get this land, and the brown team will get all of this land. And just like that, Europe now looks something like this, but we're not done just yet. We still have a little bit more land to divide up over here in the east. First of all, Norway will go ahead and take all of Russia's claims over Sweden, officially making themselves have all of Sweden to themselves. That made no sense. As for Finland, they will get all of this land, a huge claim, and the dark blue team will be re-released along with the white team. So those are the victor spoils from World War III. Now we are going to go ahead and release a few countries. Okay, I lied. There's actually a little bit more spoil to be given out. The brown team will take this land. However, as you'll notice, there's an outline of 2 countries here. Both of these countries have already existed in this series. So welcome back Poland, and welcome back Kaliningrad, but west. These guys will of course each get their capital cities back, a little bit nuked, but still there. And this will cut Russia back severely. they have lost a lot of valuable land over here in the east. And from here, it kind of only gets worse. But that does it for the peace treaty between Norway, Finland, the brown team, and the purple team, and Russia. And now we can get to some of these other treaties. Also, I have kind of colored the alliance layer in a little bit. If you see a country, and ignoring the dark green of course, but if you see like this lighter green, that means they were a victor in the war, and if you see this darker red color, that means they were a loser in the war. That's going to help me, and kind of also help you, kind of figure out the peace treaties a little bit better, and make sure that we don't miss anything. But Finland and Norway are done, so we can go ahead and remove their shape. And the brown team is done as well. Alright, next up we're heading over to Vietnam, Korea, and China. And the peace treaty between these four nations will be pretty simple. First of all, the Koreans will take hold of all of these southern Chinese provinces, and they will also take a portion of this very large province right here, and thus invokes the scenario which I've talked about before, where countries can of course do whatever they want with their war spoils. In this case, Korea is making a new province, which looks something like this. Aside from that though, they will be fully annexing these regions of China, and this is a huge blow for them. But remember what happened to China in that war. They were essentially forced to pull out of the war because of their civilian population. They were, like the old empire, kind of overthrown by their citizens, and thus allowed for the Koreans and the Vietnamese to push into Chinese territory and take land without much consequence, as the government of this country was severely disorganized during this event. Now, as for Vietnam and their war claims, well, let's just say that goodbye Orange Country, and hello, Big Southeast. Vietnam will fully annex all of southern China and rethrone themselves as the rightful ruler of South China. Rightfully so. I mean, they were there first. That's one less ally for China and a new foe right on their border. And that concludes the peace treaty between Korea, China, and Vietnam. So of course we can go ahead and erase all of their alliance things. Remember, China pretty much white peaced with Russia, so there will be no border changes between them and Russia. However, their allies, they did continue to fight, so we can take a look at what they look like, of which though the gold team also pulled out of the war, leaving only the red and orange team fighting. But before we look at that, actually, let's go over to the Americas first, where we can see the peace treaty signed between Mexico, America, and Texas, as well as the terrorist organization that got involved in this war, whilst it was already over for Texas. Remember that these guys basically made peace with each other while World War III was still ongoing. They just backed out of the war. Once the old empire collapsed, America didn't see a point in fighting, and once China had pulled out, Mexico didn't see a point in fighting either. So let's take a look at what their division of Texan territory looks like. Alright, and in the peace treaty of Texas, we see the complete division of Texan territory. Now, they do still exist, although crippled. America will annex all of this northern and kind of eastern territory. The terrorist organization will get land. However, during the peace process, there was a series of disagreements between them and Mexico and America, because these two really would have prevented these guys from getting any population centers over here where Los Angeles is. So they really pushed that organization away from their potential, and that kind of sets a sour taste in their mouth. But right now is a time for peace, so we're not too worried about that. Anyway, Mexico does create a new province right here, simply because I did not want to make their border look like that. That would be ridiculous. But they will be annexing all of this land from Texas, and the terrorist group will be annexing all of this land. Like I said, Texas does still exist. Their capital is pretty cooked, but still there. And yeah, they're now a West Coast state somehow. But that does it for the Treaty of Texas. That also removes these three from any World War III peace deals because they didn't get involved in direct fighting over in Europe. So now it's just Eurasia that is remaining, and we can go ahead and finally get to the official peace treaty of World War III. Let's start in Africa. First of all, a treaty is arranged between the Old Empire and this kind of peachy colored country right here. Basically, the Old Empire will be giving a series of provinces over to this peach country here. All of these lands, not all of those, but basically their claims along the Red Sea, and that is to prevent the gold team from really getting anything. And remember, the peach team left World War III untouched, as you can see right here, so thus they will not be losing any land in a possible peace agreement. But this land of the Old Empire all goes over to the green team, as well as this island, and that's a big yikes. But now for the division of Egypt. First of all, the Libyan country will be taking all of these provinces. These are a lot of their older provinces, and then a couple of new ones over here in northern Egypt. That annexation will look something like this, and the new province something like this. And as for the rest of the Old Empire's claims in Africa, a familiar line makes a reappearance, and this territory is given over to the Old Empire's puppet state, meaning that this thing is given independence and a lot of land in exchange for them joining the Parallelogram Alliance. Here we see a new country get carved into existence, this is going to be Egypt. Now, Egypt is not forced to join any alliance. They are allowed to be neutral. And that does it for the war spoils in this part of Africa. So we can go ahead and erase these alliance things. Now moving on over to Iberia. Now, Iberia got jumped by 4 different countries, which means it's going to be divided up between 4 different countries. And in this piece still here, we have a little bit of an issue occurring between 2 friends. The West African country and the Dark Cyan country. They can't agree on what to do with this. Now, the Dark Cyan team obviously is going to claim over all of their old lands. That's what I've outlined here. But the West African country also wants some of this land because, you know, they did the majority of the fighting. So while the French and the, I'm going to call them the Catalonians, are able to go ahead and get all of their land back, this is preventing anything from happening. But we do see the West African country take the coastal areas where Portugal is. But eventually, the Dark Cyan team will have to give in to the West African country, and they will be relinquishing all of this southern land over to them. Meaning that the Dark Cyan team will only be getting this central land back. A little bit disappointing for them, but this is the treaty over in Iberia, and of course the Iberian team does still exist, but we'll check in on them in a few episodes. So with that, all of these guys are done with their part in the war. That also includes the Orange country down here. And now we're almost to the fun stuff, which is of course dividing up the old empire a little bit, but we need to take a look at the brown team first. Of course, they got rolled over a lot in World War III. They were completely taken out by the red team, who also had a little bit of land going into Russia and the old empire. So let's take a look at what they decide to do with the brown team. All right, so first of all, the red team will take a good portion of the southern bit of the brown team and then a good chunk of land from Russia. I don't know what's happening right here, but those are their spoils from the war. They will not be taking any land from the old empire, and that's because their ally in the orange team will be getting a chunk of land. All right, and there is our peace treaty for Central Asia, more specifically the red and the orange teams. We can go ahead and remove their thing along with the brown team. And now comes the fun part, the division of the old empire amongst the cross team and the old empire's own allies, because remember the purple team did kind of storm in and to save some of their land. So first of all, speaking of the purple team, they will be annexing all of Italy from the old empire, giving them finally the entire Italian peninsula for the first time in a really long time, if they ever even had the whole thing. I don't think they have. Sicily has always been a part of the red team and then the old empire, of course. But now the purple team finally has the beginning of their Mediterranean empire, which they have dreamed of forever. Now the purple team did not invade into any of the Greek or Bulgarian areas because there were 2 rebellions there which prevented them from doing that. They did, however, invade Russia through the white team here, which means that technically the purple team can take some land from Russia in this region, which they will do. However, they will be giving the land over to the white team as kind of like a you're welcome, like, hey, here's some land. Good fighting, we survived through this. So the white team will get some land over here. However, the white team's economy is down the drain. They're not looking too good. But that does do it for both the purple and the white team's war claims. Now we can take a look at, once again, finally, the division of the old empire amongst the victors of the war. All right, first of all, you won't be getting anything, so we can get rid of you, and you also will not be getting anything, so we can get rid of you as well. All right, first starting out in the Balkan Peninsula. Here returns a familiar face. The Greek country has returned. Now, as we know, these guys were losers in World War II, but it really wasn't to the fault of their own. They were kind of forced to do some bad things by the Triangle Alliance, which somehow those members are also still around. But the Greek country was just chilling. They were just scared of the old empire's expansion. They ended up joining the Triangle Alliance, and they got whipped in World War II. But now they're back. You know who else is back? The Orange country. This is not the OG Orange country, by the way. This is a different one. Just there's happens to be some orange in this region. This country is back. Not sure for how long, though, because that's a pretty crappy place to exist. Anyway, we can go ahead and give Greece back its capital city. And unfortunately, in the war, the Orange country's capital city was destroyed. Therefore, they'll be getting a new one right here. Now, notably, this thing used to look a little bit different. It used to look like something similar to like this all through here. But they lost the war to the white team, so no, you don't get that back. And there's a pretty good chance that the white team just ends up annexing this country because of an unstable economy from within. But now we head over to the Caucasus region, where we have the releasing of a country which has been gone for a very long time, since World War I, which was back in episode 25. That was 25 episodes ago. But hey, they're coming back. And it is here that we welcome back the dark red country. No, this is not the red team. There was a dark red Caucasian country that existed kind of like at the same time as the red team, but I believe that they were annexed in an attempt to form the old empire. Now they are re-released and they are back. So now what do we do with this northern territory and this territory right here? Well, there's an agreement to allow Russia to occupy this land, but they will not officially annex it and will instead just hold on to it with their military. However, this land right here, they will annex, giving them access to the Caspian Sea. It is kind of theorized that Russia wants to form a puppet state right here, but due to the unrest that the people in this area have with Russia annexing them, it's kind of hard for them to really do that right now. So right now, they're just putting their military there in hopes of just either assimilating it or just putting down that resistance, if you know what I mean. Yeah, no full annexation just yet. But now we head over here to Central Asia, where it's finally time for some get back. Without there existing any objection, the green team will be annexing all of this land and will be setting up a puppet state around the Caspian coast. That will look something like this. Now moving on to the western part of Turkey, we see yet another familiar face make an appearance. The magenta-ish country comes back after being ruled by the old empire for many years. This is the same country that rules over Crete, by the way. So that's kind of cool. They will come back and they will definitely make the green country feel a little bit safer because now they don't even border the mess that is the old empire's remnants. Speaking of the old empire's remnants, they are now looking a lot like how they did coming out of World War II, sort of. I'm getting my time frames messed up, actually. When did the old empire form? Anyway, now we're heading back over here to Persia, where we have to do one more releasement of a previous country. This time though, it's not exactly the same as it was before, but a new country finds its way sort of in the place of that Persian country which existed a really long time ago. Oh yeah, and goodbye Lime Team, once and for all. This land is essentially kind of mushed together with the old empire's old puppet state and given new life under a new government. By the way, we can go ahead and get rid of the green team and the Russians little symbol, which means that we're still just dividing up the old empire here. Down here we have the returning of what hopefully is two familiar faces. If you don't remember these guys, they last existed in episode 26, maybe 27. Actually, I have no idea, but they're back. We have the blue and the green teams. These guys, once again, gobbled up by the old empire at some point, but now they are back. Also, that reminds me, I gotta do the capital cities for these other countries. These guys' capital was previously in Crete. However, I do believe that they would probably move it down over to maybe like right here. So we'll put their capital city right there. And the red team's capital was up here at one point, but a lot of nuclear bombs went off. So we're going to be putting their capital right here in the Black Sea. These guys already have their capital city. And as for these two, boom and boom. Oh yeah, in Egypt, we can put their capital city right there. And I think that's all of them. Anyway, now it's time to tear this thing into two. Boom and boom. The old empire is gone. No longer does it exist. It's not allowed to exist. The union between these two countries is forever forbidden. And you might be thinking, Adizz, are you really just going to leave it at that? Are you just going to let them exist like that? Huh, no. The world is going to learn from its eras, not once, but twice. Did they let this thing consolidate into one power? It did not end well. It never ended well. We, of course, had that one military leader in the old empire that went on a huge conquest, but eventually faced a coalition against him, which caused the red team to split into the red, orange, and pink teams. Those had the three descendants of the previous red team king. Then we saw the shenanigans with the Holy Cities Rebellion throwing over the government of the blue team, which turned out to be a rebellion funded by the red team in order to get the blue team to unite with the red team to form the old empire. Yeah, it's not happening anymore. That's not happening. The world knows that don't let these two near each other. So how exactly do you go about preventing that from happening? Well, you gotta fracture both of these countries so they can never have a chance of uniting into one. Let's begin with the fracturing of the old empire. First of all, starting in the northernmost region of Turkey. We will have one country released here looking something like this, another one released looking something like this, a third one looking like this, one here looking like this, one large one down here looking like that, one right here, that surely isn't going to be controversial, one pretty big one over here, one tucked in right here, and finally one right here. So that is all of the new countries that are going to be carved out of the red part of the old empire. We haven't even gotten to the blue one yet, but the red part is basically taking a brute of the blame for World War III. Now, as for the capitals of these new countries, well, there's really no strategy to this. Just kind of, sprinkle them around wherever you see a major city. Go ahead and throw down a big yellow dot there. Now, a lot of cities have been nuked, so yeah, that's rough, but it's okay. They can make it work. All right, I think that's every single country that I have down. Yep, I talked about every single one of these countries And I don't think I missed any. So this is the result of the red team's division. And remember, the red team is the one that formed the old empire. They did the rebellion within the blue team to get that in their favor. Now, as for the blue team, they are still going to face consequence because, of course, they were a part of the old empire, a core part of the old empire. Let's make sure we don't leave any unintentional remnants of that anywhere. But since they weren't like the red team who initiated the union, they're kind of getting a slight pass, but they're still going to have to give up a lot of land. Now, the blue team is long dead. That was a country a very long time ago. The rebellion was also a long time ago, but before that, that was the blue team. That blue team is gone. This is not that blue team. That thing was in episode 1. It's gone. Similar to how this is not the red team from episode 1. This is just red. I like the color red. I'm making this red. We'll get to the more of this in a second because this is the old capital of the old empire. We're not done here just yet. But as for the blue team, they will be ceding over this coast over here in the Persian Gulf to this kind of brownish gold country. I'm gonna say they're more gold than, no, they're more brown than gold. Whatever, doesn't matter. We'll be giving them that, which gives them access to the ocean. Anyway, a new country will be formed right here. Horrible border, but that's, actually, no, I'm gonna change that. All right, that's better. I just took away one of the provinces. No, this is not the lime team. Don't get your hopes up. Over here, we have the creation of a new country. This is kind of like a lightish pink color, obviously. They're chilling there. And now we have just a few more territories to divide up from the blue team, who, like I said, will be allowed to exist just in the south. All right, here is another country. Also, no, this is not the old empire either. But finally, we have our last country in the center here. This is the yellow country, and that is the division of the old empire all completed up. So I guess you could say that Russia won World War III. I mean, the old empire doesn't exist. Russia does, and so does China. So yeah, I guess that's that. We cannot forget to do capital cities though. Green team, bang. Teal team, bang. Yellow team, bang. Pink team, where do you, bang. Blue team, bang. You know what happened right here? Yeah, the start of the series. Actually, it might have been right here. We'll do it right there. And that is everybody. All right, welcome to the new Middle East. Fractured and interesting. We'll have to see what issues arise in this jumbo of mess. Also, I didn't forget, but the remaining core province of the old empire where the capital lies, this area / country, it's a new country, but not for long, is going to be divided up by some of the top powers in the world. This is a collaborative effort to keep this from happening ever again because it seems that this capital city is kind of cursed. So what do I mean by divided up? Well, the Russians will be making a puppet state / occupying the northern half of this country, including the capital province of the old empire. The brown team will be getting a split of it. China will be getting a split of it. And finally, and most notably, India will be getting a part of it. Now, these are the 4 strongest countries in the world at this very point, so it makes sense that they are the ones to divide up the territory where the core of the old empire once existed. These are all puppet states, of course, or it's kind of like in World War II when the Allies and the Soviets divided up Germany. There was all different pieces controlled by the different powers. Eventually, the Allies united all their pieces into what was West Germany, and the Soviets renamed theirs to East Germany. And then, of course, the capital city, Berlin, was divided up, but here, that capital city is already pretty well divided up. Yeah. They need to have the capital isolated in some random province. Like, there's no need to have it isolated in only Russia and then dividing it up. I feel like that's kind of stupid. So we just divide it up perfectly here. But yeah, that's going to do it for today's episode. Crazy. The old empire is gone. Who would have thought? I knew for a long time that the old empire wasn't going to make it because it just simply was too strong. Oh, we never talked about Norway invading Greenland. Well, like I said, they only occupied them to take their oil. And since Greenland is a really weak country, one of the weakest in the world, they kind of just have to accept that. Norway did pay some reparations to Greenland, but none like the ones that they promised, so Greenland kind of got screwed over. But Norway will not be facing any consequences for that because, I mean, we'll see why in the next episode. But yeah, that does it for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's just crazy what happened here and then how that configured over to this. Also, I do want to say, the peace treaty was signed on January 1st, 2000, meaning that World War III lasted approximately 10 total years. That's kind of insane. Also, we can recolor this country. I might make it just purple. Oh, and the alliances. I didn't do that either. Okay, we'll do that next episode. But anyway, once again, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyway, once again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode. And of course, thank you to all our superfans. This includes CTG on YT, WICSO, Euroball, Terminator, Augusto, King Cheese, A Norwegian, RS, Gail Martinez, Australian Geo Guy, America and Canada and UK, Zaylance, Lazo Does Nothing, Freezioi, Laser Tase, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Pablo Sigma Cat, Death Strider X, Hammer Toad 45, and DW Cool Dude. Once again, thank you guys.